Welcome to Daily Wire Backstage. If you're watching at dailywire.com, we thank you. We'll be taking questions from our subscribers at dailywire.com shortly. But if you're not a subscriber to dailywire.com, go subscribe today. We have one of our biggest promotions of the year. Promo code FIGHT gets you 47% off of your annual membership. Why 47? Well, because we hope that Donald Trump is our 47th president, as he was our 45th. Tonight we'll be covering the VP debate between J.D. Vance and whoever that weird-looking dude is that he's running against. It's going to be, I'd like to say it's going to be a good show, but you know how this goes on these debate shows. It's tough. It's tough.
It's a rough ride.
It's a rough ride. Of course, I'm joined by Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Andrew Klavan, and that guy. And by the way, speaking of that guy has become maybe the biggest cigar salesman in America.
All right.
Some people are saying that because of the sales numbers that reflect that of the Mayflower cigars. Really a dream of many years now, about 15. And I'm so thrilled that Mayflower cigars could become probably the biggest cigar brand launch ever right before all the ports close and we can't get any more.
What I love is that we are sitting with one of the top documentarians literally of all time.
Yeah.
And Michael got the shout out for selling cigars.
Let me just say, because I had to say this to our team recently, I have had to congratulate Matt Walsh so many times in the last 30 days.
One more time's not going to hurt you.
It is true that Matt's film, Am I Racist, is the top political documentary of the last at least 20 years in the United States box office. And that, as I have said, ad nauseum now, by which I mean I am nauseated. It's quite a literal statement. Truly no one in the world could have made the film but Matt. The guy is one of one. If you haven't seen Am I Racist, it is still in theaters nationwide. Please go see it this weekend. It's not only, don't go to support it. Go because it's absolutely hilarious. And if you don't believe me, well, then go to support it because we still want your money. You will discover that it is absolutely hilarious.
Also, please go see it because one of my personal goals is to beat Bill Maher's Religulous.
How close are we?
We're about $2 or $3 million away.
It could happen.
So we can do it. We can do it. But so if for no other reason, if you've already seen it, rally together and let's make this thing happen.
So, yeah, we have a VP debate tonight, and there's some things happening in the world that I'm sure will come up on the stage, other than they're eating the cats and they're eating the dogs, and Tim Walz possibly being the weirdest gym coach of all time.
But the first thing that's happening in the world is happening right here in our home state of Tennessee and all across the Southeast, and that is the horrible after effects of this terrible hurricane. And our friend Robbie Starbuck, I think, is doing some of the best work in the country right now of helping rally people together to provide aid, particularly here in Tennessee, but around the Southeast. And we have Robbie with us right now. And I want to get to him because his wife, from what I understand, could literally give birth to their child at any moment. So let's take advantage of having Robbie here while we can. Robbie, God bless you for the work you're doing. Tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And you are correct. It could happen anytime now. But, this all started Sunday night. I was looking at the federal response to what was going on in Tennessee. And I had friends who had gone in to visit and they brought me back photos and video of sort of how devastating it was. And I said, what's the biggest issue? They said, nobody can call their family members. It's why so many people are missing. There's no service. There's no internet. And I said, well, there's a no-brainer. We need to get Starlink. So the following morning, I sent out a bunch of my guys. I said, go to every Home Depot in Middle Tennessee, buy every Starlink they have, and head to East Tennessee. And so I was calling representatives along the way, and I've been able to get in touch with pretty much every member of Congress that's over there, their local state reps. And, today I spoke with the governor's team, Marsha Blackburn. I just got off the phone with House Majority Leader William Lamberth, and Lamberth told me the same thing. He's never seen any damage like this before in the state of Tennessee. So it is something truly awful. And so we got these Starlinks up, and we're talking about not just the fact that normal people can't reach people. We're talking about police. We're talking about 911 services. We're talking about even TEMA themselves, Tennessee Emergency Management. We gave them one of our Starlink units. So actually, right before I got on here, I just bought 20 more Starlink units, and we're sending those out tomorrow over the next 48 hours to deploy to different, more difficult to reach mountainous regions, because a lot of those areas up in the mountains, they feel forgotten about, and frankly, for a long time have been in a state where they kind of feel like they get put last. And so we want to make make sure we get them connected and they can reach their family members and maybe start to bring down that number of people who are seen as missing still because really their families just haven't been able to hear from them.
Over 130 of our fellow citizens are dead from this storm. What is the number one thing people could do to help you with the work you're doing right now? I think we've lost Robbie. The technology isn't great tonight where he's at, but I can answer for him. I'm sure that what we need is resources. You've got so many of our fellow citizens displaced and suffering because of this storm. The work that Robbie and others are doing is so vitally important. And if you reach out to us here at Daily Wire, I don't actually have in front of me a URL that'll be useful for Robbie because I was hoping he'd be able to tell us about that. But we'll get back to you throughout the broadcast with this. Before we, the election, incredibly important. Events taking place overseas tonight, unbelievably important. But right here at home, it can be very easy to overlook the suffering of our fellow citizens. And we have to rally to take care of each other. That's what it means to be a nation. So also worth noting that the work Robbie's been doing on DEI in corporate America for the last 8 weeks is unbelievable. I mean, the guy's becoming an institution, and we're proud to help him out and support him. Ben, talk to us about what's happening overseas.
Well, I mean, if you were watching the live stream that we did a little bit earlier, we were covering live as missiles fell on Israel. About 181 cruise missiles were fired from Iran into Israel. This was, as they said, in response to the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, who is the head of the terror group Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah has been firing some 8,000 to 10,000 rockets into Israel since October 8th. Iran had already, you remember back in April, shot about 300 cruise missiles and drones at Israel. Israel had really held off on a response because Joe Biden told them to. That's not likely to be the case after today's missile attacks. Israel has said they're going to strike back, and they're going to strike back particularly hard. They've been waiting to do this. Iran obviously is on the verge of a nuclear weapon. Iran also has been spreading via its terror proxies all sorts of destruction all over the region. Essentially, Israel has been at war on 7 fronts, from Hamas in their south, from the Houthis in Yemen, who fired a cruise missile at Tel Aviv just earlier this week. Israel, in response, blew up a couple of the ports that the Houthis were in control of. Israel, again, is doing one of the great military operations of all time in Lebanon against Hezbollah, which was supposed to be the best armed, the best prepared terrorist group in the entire region. In the course of about 2.5 weeks, Israel defenestrated their entire leadership, destroyed all of their long-range capacity, and has done so at the cost so far of 0 Israeli soldiers. It truly is an amazing performance by the Israeli military. They're also at war with Iranian proxies in Syria, in Iraq, and now, because Iran feels as though all of their proxies are going away, Iran is directly attacking Israel in an attempt to shore up some level of domestic support for what is a shockingly weak performance by their terrorist proxies. And so Israel has already said they're going to respond in kind. That probably means one of 3 things. It means actually taking out some top members of the Iranian leadership. It means blowing up some of the Iranian nuclear facilities, or all of the Iranian nuclear facilities, which Israel has been saying they need to be doing for probably a decade or more. Or it means blowing up some of the oil refineries in Iran and thus shutting down the Iranian economy in an incredibly serious way, and possibly putting the regime on its last legs, because it turns out the people of Iran really, really do not like the regime over there. So what we're watching right now is a sea change in the Middle East, and that sea change overall is actually quite good. And this is what it looks like when a Western power, and Israel is a Western power, decides to actually flex its muscle and win wars, as opposed to what Joe Biden would have them do, which is ceasefire, slow walk it, negotiate with a terrorist group. The entire north of Israel is depopulated. There are 100,000 people who haven't been living in their homes since October 7th. And again, it's in the north of Israel. Israel has said from the beginning, its goal is not to take over any of this territory. Its goal is simply to get those people back in their homes on the Israeli side of the border. And Israel's going to achieve that regardless of what the United States has to say about it.
It's easy to breeze past Biden's guilt in this, Biden's culpability.
Joe Biden is singularly responsible for the destruction of the Middle East right now. Singularly. It's astonishing.
The only thing that would keep me from agreeing with singularly is that there is a Barack Obama. But essentially, Barack Obama and Joe Biden decided in the mid-2000s that Iran needed to have regional authority in the Middle East. They objected to George W. Bush's foreign policy. They objected to any idea that Saudi Arabia would become the dominant power in the Middle East. And they concluded that if you want to challenge America's dependence on foreign oil, if you not America's use of oil at all, you really need to castrate Saudi Arabia, and you do that by letting Iran ascend. They basically put Iran on a path to a nuclear weapon, gave them $400 million in secret cash transfer, literally pallets of cash that are flying into the country.
$1.6 billion.
Is it $1.6 billion?
$1.6 billion.
And all of that we're seeing now come to a complete end. I mean, this is, here at the very end of Joe Biden's administration, we're seeing the complete collapse of what amounts now to 16 years of American foreign policy.
There's actually an even older historical echo here, which is bizarre. Today, coincidentally, providentially, is the 100th birthday of Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter presided over, and in fact, I think encouraged, the overthrow of our old ally in Iran, the Shah of Iran. The Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, has been in waiting outside of the country now for some time. He just tweeted out and more or less said, we need regime change. The Iranian people, the Iranian military should stand with me and not with the regime. And so regardless of what happens tonight and tomorrow in Iran, Jimmy Carter might live long enough to see the return of the Shah of Iran that he deposed, or at least the son of the Shah.
I think that the point about foreign policy here for the United States is that the United States is stronger when it lets our allies actually do what they need to do. I mean, really, that is the lesson. I know, it's such a crazy, and I'm not even talking just here about Israel, to whom the Biden administration has been preaching all along, slow walking, make a deal, don't go into Rafah, don't destroy Hamas. Israel, by the way, it's now clear that Israel's performance in the Gaza Strip is, again, militarily speaking, pretty incredible. They've lost about 320 soldiers. Hamas has lost in excess of 20,000 members of their brigades, and 23 of their 24 brigades have been completely destroyed. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was fighting the Houthis. The Houthis have shut down all shipping in the Red Sea. Joe Biden came in, he delisted the Houthis, and he alienated the Saudis on behalf of the Iranians. And so he basically castrated all of our allies in the Middle East. And you know what happened after that? Iran said, okay, well, I guess it's go time. Yeah. It's go time. And that's true for everything. You know, when I did the fundraiser for President Trump a while back, I've told this story before. Well, President Trump was talking about why Russia didn't go into Ukraine. Or the left is constantly saying that Trump is some sort of Russian cat's paw, he's a Russian tool. And he said, you want to know why Russia never went into Ukraine while I was president? The reason is, I said to Vladimir Putin, if you go into Ukraine, I'm going to bomb the shit out of you. And then he continues the story and says, and Vladimir Putin said, no, you won't. And I said, well, I might. And he said, if there's a 5% chance that I might bomb them, then they won't do it. And it turns out that actually the credible threat of force is the best deterrent to people doing stupid things like October 7th. This is why when President Trump says, correctly, that if he were the president of the United States, October 7th never would have happened, he is absolutely correct. That's the reason I was saying Biden is singularly responsible, is because the pathway when Donald Trump was in office was that Saudi was going to normalize, Iran was contained, and they were probably going to collapse from within, which is the exact reason why they launched October 7th via their proxies in the first place. So, you know, good on Israel, obviously, for going and taking out, by the way, American enemies, including Hassan Nasrallah. Hezbollah is responsible for hundreds of American deaths, including in the barracks bombing in 1983, 241 Marines killed.
American.
And you know, this is what, if no one wants to go to war, if the West is going to go to war, it should go to war to win. It should not go to war to fight for a temporary ceasefire that is immediately broken as soon as our enemies, and by our, I mean any enemy of the West, decides that it is of their benefit to do so.
It's a shocking thing when you consider that every terrorist organization that you name is really just Iran. You know, we have all these different names for them, but it all comes down to Iran, a country that has sworn itself not just to Israel's destruction, but to ours. I mean, this is what they chant in the streets when they have their ceremonies, is death to the U.S. And what this means about Barack Obama is kind of uncanny. It means that our friend Dinesh D'Souza was convicted of a minor, donation to a campaign simply because they wanted to get back at him for being right when he pointed out from a close reading of Obama's book that Obama was an anti-colonialist who blamed us for the problems. Yep. And he basically wanted our enemies to be in charge of the Middle East while we withdrew, which is it's almost insane, the level of hatred you have to have, and then the level of stupidity you have to have after Trump fixed it. Trump, who only he could fix it, actually fixed it to put that policy back in place and come to the place that we're in now. Everything that's happening, you can't blame it all on Obama and Biden. You have to blame some of it on Iran, but still, everything that's happening now.
But Iran was the factor that didn't change. Iran didn't change, right? Only the American approach to Iran changed.
I've told this story before, I'm sure. My favorite moment in the career of Vice President Dick Cheney was toward the end of the second term of George W. Bush, and Dick Cheney was on Larry King on CNN. and he was sitting just like this, but he had a little bit of a belly at the time. And he had his hands kind of folded over like this. And he looked for all the world like Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah, he was kind of hunched over like this. Every bit the cartoon villain. Look, and Larry King was peppering him with questions in that Larry King style, and he finally, out of nowhere, non sequitur said, "Do you believe we should bomb Iran?" And Dick Cheney said, "For what?" I just thought, it's the greatest answer I'd ever heard from a politician.
A masterclass.
You know,
the masterclass.
I think that the point of all that's going on, and it's the hurricane, where Kamala Harris is off campaigning in California with all of her Hollywood buddies, and then doing ridiculous photo ops in which her earphones are not plugged into her phone as she writes on an empty piece of paper. It's just ridiculous. By the way, that entire photo, I'm old enough to remember when George W. Bush was ripped up and down for being on an airplane. You remember this, over Hurricane Katrina. He wasn't on the ground, he was on an airplane. She takes the exact same photo, except dumber. And somehow this is treated as an excuse for her inaction with regard to the hurricane. So you got that. You got the port strike, which, by the way, is actively facilitated by this administration. This administration has the power under Taft-Hartley to impose an 80-day cool-down period. They are not doing so. They're allowing the strike to go on, which means all of your products get more expensive. I've been saying for weeks, there aren't that many factors that can change that are left in the election, right? Everybody has their mind made up about Harris and about Trump. The only thing that can really change, aside from this possible debate, something theoretically could happen in the debate, but aside from that, it's just things that happen in the world. Yeah. And the things happening in the world right now.
There are a lot of things happening in the world.
Well, and this is the thing. The things that are happening in the world are unmasking just how awful this administration is. And she is the vice president of the United States. The thing that is driving me batty, it's driving me up a wall, is this attempt to pretend that she is somehow not complicit or involved in any decision that is made by this administration, but she's the beneficiary of being the person who pushed old Joe off the back of the boat and then sailed into the sunset.
I think Biden said that she was involved in everything.
That's why I think that, Tim, not to jinx it, but to bring it to the subject at hand, the debate, J.D. Vance obviously is aware of all this. I think he's going to hammer this point over and over again. I think Tim Walz is in some trouble. I think that this is going to be, I know that J.D. Vance is expected to win, so there's more pressure on him. But J.D. Vance is very good on message. He's going to hammer this point. Tim Walz has never, we would talk about Kamala Harris never taking a tough line of questioning. Tim Walz has never been, ever. When's the last time that guy's been questioned in any kind of serious way?
And they brainwashed him to become a Chinese agent.
Right. And if you go back, anytime that you see, if you go back far enough in his political career, he tends to get pretty rattled. He tends to get pretty angry. So I think he's going to have a tough time tonight because I think J.D. Vance is going to hammer this point over and over again.
But I think the point that he can keep hitting, too, is, the Democrats are going to say, you're selectively blaming Biden for war in the Middle East. Well, there's often war in the Middle East. But the proof of the pudding is in the tasting with the Trump policy. And it's not just the war in the Middle East. It's also the war in Ukraine. It's also North Korea calming down under Trump. It's also Putin not invading another country.
China going after Philippines now.
It's also the longshoreman strike, and it's also the response to domestic problems, and it's like everything. So if you want to say, well, look, the war in the Middle East, that was an event that couldn't have been stopped or foreseen. Okay, well, how come everything is worse under Biden and Harris? How, just show me anything that is better, and they really don't have any answer for that.
Yeah,
and I think the Vance is on message with this sort of thing. The thing he's going to have to avoid, and the thing the moderators are really going to try and do, is the same thing they did with Trump. They're going to try and distract him, right? They're going to hit him with the cats and the dogs, right? They're going to say, you were the one who retailed that story in the first place. Why did you retell a story that's not true about Haitian immigrants? Isn't that racist? And we'll see if he feels the necessity to defend on that, specifically because, listen, part of the problem with being the vice presidential nominee under Donald Trump is that you actually have two separate audiences, right? You have the audience that's the American people, and then you have the audience that's Donald Trump. And I think that one of the problems that Vance has here, and it's challenging for him, and I sympathize, is that if he's asked about the cats and the dogs, instead of saying what, he should say, which is, that's not the problem at hand. The problem at hand, obviously, is the major problem of descending 20,000 Haitian immigrants on a town of 60,000 people and all the attendant problems that brings in the open border. Instead of doing that, he might feel the necessity in order to perform for President Trump and start talking in justificatory terms.
I don't think
about I don't think he will either, but that is...
I also think if they team up on him like they did with Trump, he will be more equipped to go after them and they kind of detail...
You say more equipped. This is the most interesting thing to me about the presidential debate, is that we know that Donald Trump is capable of attacking the moderators.
Yes, but
he didn't.
He didn't. I think
not a single time.
I think, the consultant class gets into these guys' heads after a while, even Trump, and they hold them back, which is a mistake.
He said he regretted it.
Yeah, I'm hoping they haven't done that to Vance. I don't think they have.
Vance is
I have to be honest and say that I cannot see this affecting the actual numbers in the election unless they uncover the oubliette that is obviously in Walz's basement where he's holding the women that he's killing and turning into women's suits.
For Media Matters who's watching at home, what we're trying to say is
Buffalo Bill.
Absolutely clear.
Do you think he's going to come out and do the whole, tire store plastic inflatey thing, when he comes out?
Well, it's one of his four moves.
Full Chris Farley.
The very limp-wristed clapping and all that.
Who was the woman, the journalist who said to him the other day, "You've redefined masculinity"?
She said it to Doug Emhoff.
To what, to femininity?
Jen Stockton said it to Doug Emhoff. And he did. He redefined masculinity by nailing his nanny. That's how you redefine masculinity.
That's not a redefinition.
Yeah,
I know.
That's
simply defined. Re-articulating.
So we're going to go to the vice presidential debate in just a moment. We're not able to get our friend Robbie Starbuck back on the line. We do have a place where you can donate by sending supplies, and that's to Rep. Jeremy Faison. And the address is 425 Heritage Boulevard. 424 Heritage Boulevard, Newport, Tennessee, 37821. We've got some supplies that are badly needed for your fellow American citizens here on the screen. Because we weren't able to get Robbie back on the line, we weren't able to get a URL, which would make it easier. And so just to help, Daily Wire is going to kick in $50,000 worth of supplies right now, since we weren't able to do as good a job of helping promote this as we would like to have. But please join us in doing so by, again, sending donations and supplies to 424 Heritage Boulevard, Newport, Tennessee, 37821. This storm has been not completely unprecedented. You bring up Katrina and other horrible events, but certainly the worst in the last
long time.
Decade.
It's unprecedented in the dearth of coverage. I mean,
That's correct.
I mean, Hurricane Katrina was national and international news for months after it happened. But in this case, it doesn't fit the political narrative quite as well. And so these people in North Carolina, in Eastern Tennessee, all over the Southeast are completely overlooked.
By the way, that is the thing that is amazing, is whenever there's a coverage of a hurricane, the basic rule is if it benefits the Democrat, you talk about it, and if it benefits the Republican, you don't. So Florida, Ron DeSantis cleaned that stuff up. They had electricity by the next morning. Okay, he's done an amazing job with every hurricane that's come through Florida, and they deliberately refuse to cover it. The same thing, Bill Lee's doing a really good job over here. The Brian Kemp in Georgia is doing a really good job. The administration is not doing a good job. I mean, the administration has fallen all over itself over and over and over in a way that George W. Bush did not even do during Hurricane Katrina, and that basically destroyed the second term of his presidency. Meanwhile, Barack Obama basically showed up in a flight jacket at one point during Hurricane Sandy, and suddenly he was the great God's gift to
Christie. He hugged Christie.
And this is not the first time that this administration has gotten away with a really bungled disaster response. I mean, the Maui fires were just a year ago. And the thing you have to keep in mind with this area of the country, Western North Carolina, which my wife and I have been out there many times, a beautiful part of the country. And people always ask when these hurricanes hit and there's flooding, they say, well, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you evacuate? Nobody in that part of the country is thinking, I've been to Asheville. You're not thinking about hurricanes in Asheville.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-boggling. It's like once a century this sort of thing happens. So that raises a lot of questions. Some of it is just a really terrible turn of events that obviously you can't control a hurricane. But there are some real questions about not just the response, but also what kind of warning these people have to get out and evacuate. And by the time they started getting the warnings, flash floods were already, the roads were gone. And but these are questions that we're not supposed to ask because, to even ask it is somehow
the governor of North Carolina is a Democrat, right? Cooper.
Yeah.
Right? So that is obviously...
Although John Nolte is down there. He's been practically washed away.
Yeah, that's right.
Part, yeah.
Nolte says that his entire community is destroyed.
Just gone. Yeah.
Gone.
Wow.
Well, let's get some predictions for tonight since we're only a couple minutes out. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think Vance does?
Compared to expectations or sort of objectively?
I think in terms of forwarding the ball. How about that? How much can he do, number one? How much do you think this debate can affect things? And number two, how well do you think he's going to do?
My theory is that neither Kamala nor Trump had a particularly strong debate performance in the presidential debate. I think JD will have a strong debate performance tonight. I don't believe that Tim Walz will, although certainly I understand that setting those expectations is dangerous. I think that Walz will do better than Republicans predict that he will do.
Yeah.
But I don't think that he can compete with J.D. Vance.
Walz is scrappy, and so he should not be underestimated. I don't think he's all that intelligent. I don't think he's all that well-educated, but he's scrappy, and that's what counts for a politician. However, the Democrats have made a big mistake with J.D. Vance. They have mismanaged expectations of J.D., and most Americans have really never seen this guy unfiltered. I can attest, having been around J.D. Vance, even back in the college days. I didn't really know him there, but I know enough to know he was a very impressive guy then at the top law school in the country, and he's only gotten more impressive. This is an extremely intelligent man. This is an extremely well-educated man, and this is an extremely disciplined man. So the Democrats, I think, actually bungled their play a little bit here. People will be impressed with him.
I think he'll do very well. It won't matter at all.
Yeah.
It's not going to make a difference.
Nothing moves the polls at this
point.
I think he'll do very well. And putting seriously what I was joking about before, there's something wrong with Tim Walz. I mean, we're all joking about it, but there's something. He's like the wolf in the pack that the other wolves kill because they know something's the matter with him.
Your language tonight is
For Media Matters watching it, what Andrew Klavan is saying is that Tim Walz is he's like a wolf
In the pack.
who is killed.
Who's dressing in the bodies of women. But the only thing is, if that comes out at all, I think that could have some small effect because there really is. I'm sorry, but he is that guy that you just think.
And there's something wrong with Kamala Harris for selecting him. I heard Megyn Kelly saying this on the Honestly podcast this morning. She said, if the Democrats had learned any humility from the obvious change in popular sentiment towards some of these culture war issues, she wouldn't have selected for her running mate Tim Walz. I mean, he's a Maoist Chris Farley. He is a true...
What he means by that is...
he is a truly communist sympathizing character, one of the most radical governors in the country. And she selected him on that basis because that's what he is.
Yeah, and he let Minneapolis burn,
He let Minneapolis burn.
I just think... I think he lies. Every other word out of his mouth is a lie. That's going to come out. It may not come out tonight, but it's going to come out over time. And I really do think that there's just something about him that goes up your spine. Yeah. And I think that if that comes out, he may be able to hide that. But if that comes out, that could help a little bit.
I think the only thing that can really help from the debate, and again, I agree with all of you. I think that JD's super smart. I think that JD is going to be a lot more likable than people expect in this debate. The way the media have played him up is that he's the one eating the dogs and the cats. But the reality is that again, I've interviewed JD. I know JD a little bit. He's actually quite a likable person. And I think that the one thing that could happen that could really harm the Democrats is that Walz has a task not just to attack Trump, which again everybody can do. Walz has the task of somehow building up Kamala, and that's nearly impossible to do. Yeah. That is a very difficult task.
Yep.
Yeah. He has to say that she hasn't been the vice president of the United States for the last 4 years, because to bring this thing full circle, instead of running as the incumbents, they're running as the outsiders who are going to take back the country that Democrats have been governing for 12 of the last 16 years.
Also, I wonder about the news today, obviously, the Middle East lighting on fire. This Israel issue is a delightful one for the Democrats because it's a wedge issue. It's not just that it's a tough issue to navigate, it's that anything they say about Israel hurts them because their activist base hates Israel and the more established base basically likes Israel, and America broadly basically likes Israel. So anything they say only loses them points. I thought that the moderators were going to try to avoid the issue entirely, just like they'll try to avoid a lot of the other shortfalls for Kamala. But this one, it's some of the biggest news in the last year, so I think it has to come up. And I don't think that's going to play very well in Michigan, for instance.
And this is the great danger, obviously, on this issue. And they're going to open with it, obviously. It's the big news of the day. So when they open with that, will Tim Walz actually have the ability to mimic the Joe Biden ceasefire, everything has to slow down language? And it'll be interesting to see how JD handles it. Again, I think that JD's likely tack is going to be the same as Trump's, which is none of this would have happened when Trump was president because it didn't happen when Trump was president. That's the easy answer, as opposed to getting specific about sort of the policies that he would pursue in the Middle East, which does have a wedge on the right a little bit as well.
Peculiar, we're seeing that Senator Vance and Governor Walz are actually already on stage, but the CBS coverage hasn't actually gone to them yet. It looked peculiar. They were exchanging some sort of remarks with one another, and now they've cut away. but we should be about 30 seconds from going to the debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz.
I could see Governor Walsh did say ni hao to... Will that issue come up? I mean, that's a big question. House Oversight Committee releases this big report about Walz's ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Probably they don't bring it up, but maybe J.D. brings it up.
Let's get this over with.
And with that,
go over to dailywire.com, become a subscriber, get your 47% off with promo code FIGHT, and we'll see you after the debate.
The first and only meeting between the two men who hope to become vice president of the United States. Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News vice presidential debate starts now.
Fight for every single vote, and we're going to take this country back.
And we are ready to continue to build the future together.
We're going to turn this whole country red with President Donald J. Trump's leadership.
You know, it's at the end of this little journey, Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
This is a CBS News special, live from CBS News headquarters in New York. America Decides, the vice presidential debate.
Good evening, I'm Norah O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance, tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate, who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene. And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor Walz, if you were the final voice in the Situation Room, would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together. Understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the vice president said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walsh just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, it is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walsh just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walsh, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now, and you can't ignore October the 7th, which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last time, I'm 40 years old, when was the last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall. Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today, actually, a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walsh joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job. And I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America, because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Governor Walz, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all, it is a horrific tragedy with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in. What we've seen out of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country. 2,000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly, Kamala Harris herself doesn't believe her own rhetoric on this. If she did, she would actually agree with Donald Trump's energy policies. Now, something Governor Walz said I think is important to touch upon, because when we talk about clean energy, I think that's a slogan that often the Democrats will use here. And I'm talking, of course, about the Democratic leadership. And the real issue is that if you're spending hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China, number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas in China, especially the components that go into those solar panels. So if you really want to make the environment cleaner, you've got to invest in more energy production. We haven't built a nuclear facility, I think, one in the past 40 years. Senator. Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the climate.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said, again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure that we're protecting by burying our power lines? How do we make sure that we're protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of? But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. honest. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor, do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history, 30% decrease in Ohio. But there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the attorney general of the largest state, a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this, and that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was crafted by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents, detection for drugs, DOJ money to speed up these the adjudications on this, just what America wants. But as soon as I was getting ready to pass and actually tackle this, Donald Trump said no, told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature. You can't just do this through the executive branch. So look, we have the options to do this. Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. I'll build you a big, beautiful wall, and Mexico will pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he came down that escalator, dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules. And it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who can't afford health care, schools that are overwhelmed. It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president
Senator,
again.
Your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our borders are. Kamala Harris has been. And it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, they just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help. But most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico. You've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us, you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it. And it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status. Right. Temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went into effect. As far as the housing goes, I've seen it in Minnesota. 12% more houses in Minneapolis, prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit, we have one in Minnesota, reduces childhood poverty by 1/3. We save money in the long run, and we do the right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do, we'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share. When you do that, our system works best, more people are participating in it, and folks have the things that they need.
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning the deficit? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans. Now, Donald Trump's economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom. Because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country, 1.5% inflation, and to boot, peace and security all over the world. So when people say that Donald Trump's economic plan doesn't make sense, I say, look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers. Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle class?
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, You don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, whatever, how is it fair that you're paying your taxes every year and Donald Trump hasn't paid any federal tax in the last 15 years, and the last year as president? That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much, and I hope they're in bed right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop. And we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walsh just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics show that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now, look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing. Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business. But those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first in health care for a reason. We trust women. We trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do. I want us as a Republican Party to be pro-family in the fullest sense of the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms to afford to have babies. I want it to make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest, sometimes a very, very messy and divided country.
Governor, would you like to respond and also answer the question about restrictions?
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights as basic as the right to control your own body is determined on geography. There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible, because we've got to do a better job at that. And that's what real leadership is.
Governor, your response.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that, too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all. We are pro-freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit, but we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
Senator?
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us from increasing funding for children. It doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News vice presidential debate in just a moment.
We want to be the world's greatest media company. This company represents a whole new generation. We're building alternatives, and the alternatives are working. Americans have enormous economic might. They just don't have any alternatives, and we're going to give them to them. It's going to change everything. You can buy my new razor instead. They'll like what we make more. They'll trust what we make more. We'll hit the target every single time. Let's make a movie. We are just getting started. We decided to spend $100 million making kids content. We're going to knock it out of the park, and no one else is going to do it.
Your movie is really funny. It's really funny. By myself, laughing out loud hysterically today.
It is one of the most important contributions to cinema in American history.
Your goal is to conduct an investigation into something key to the culture war.
There were so many great moments in there.
Were these people real that are in this movie?
It's a great film.
I highly recommend everybody go see this movie.
Mazel tov, as
thanks.
Ben's people would say.
Am I Racist? Rated PG-13 in theaters now. November 5th. The night America's fate is decided. As the final votes are counted and a nation waits for the outcome, join us to break down the live election results as only Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, and Jeremy Boring can. Daily Wire Election Night 2024. Get real-time results and exclusive insights from the most trusted names in conservative media. This is more than an election. It's history in the making. Join the Daily Wire as each vote is counted, each state called, and each race decided. Daily Wire, Election Night 2024.
Oh, hey, I'm Jeremy Boring, CEO of Daily Wire and founder of Jeremy's Razors. Woke razor companies love to take your money while trampling on your values. Me? I just love your money.
Cut! What is this?
We're filming the commercial for the brand new second-generation Jeremy's razor.
Yeah, I get it. We moved our manufacturing out of China. Plus, with the new Sprint 3 and Precision 5 blades, you can shave like a man, not a manifesto. But who's he?
Customers want diversity. Customers want inclusion. Customers want Black Jeremy.
That's why there's no white people in commercials anymore? Unbelievable. Stop giving your money to woke corporations who hate you. Give it to me instead.
Buy the new radically redesigned second-gen razors featuring sharper, longer-lasting blades and superior durability. Go to jeremysrazors.com now.
Ever wished you could clear out a whole theater just for you and your friends?
I think it's a beautiful idea.
You think it's a beautiful idea?
I do.
Well, now's your chance to do the work. It's the Am I Racist Theater Takeover Sweepstakes.
So what is the work? Because I want to do
the work.
That. I want to do it too, but I don't know what is the work.
One lucky winner will claim an entire theater for a private screening of Am I Racist with 50 of their closest friends.
Why are we talking about statistics? This is not a matter of statistics.
We'll provide the snacks and drinks. You just bring your crew and get ready for a hilarious night out. Plus, you'll roll up to your screening in style on a brand new Razor scooter. Just like Matt Walsh rides in the hit comedy. To enter, follow Daily Wire on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or X. Then tag 3 friends you'd invite on the sweepstakes post.
Is there a black person around here?
I got black friends. I love them too.
I'm wondering, where do I go from here as an individual?
Go to amiracist.com to get the details.
Since I joined forces with the Daily Wire Plus, we've built a comprehensive collection of premium content. Get the entire collection of Mastering Life, Strengthen Your Relationship with my series Marriage. In the series on masculinity, discover your purpose. In Vision and Destiny, develop a vision for your own life. You need to do that. My new
CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago. But what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted enhanced red flag laws, enhanced background checks, and we can start to get data. But here's the problem. If we really want to solve this, we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that. But that's not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said, actually, about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly, weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is, okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse, or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but it only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about cities and where it's at. The number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns. It's just the guns. And there are things that you can do about it. But I do think that this is one, and I think this is a healthy conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. Let's turn now to the top contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around. Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house, I'm thinking of Christmas services after midnight mass where you go with your family. We need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota from that lead. We in the state invested in making sure our housing was the biggest investment that we'd ever made in housing. It starts to make it easier. We cut some of the red tape. Local folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, one of the, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now, look, you're going to pay it back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why we have massive increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens? If you lower energy prices, as Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill, one of the biggest drivers of housing costs aside from illegal immigration is, think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But, Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for a national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, I do want to let you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the facts. I guess we agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution. I was going to ask, though, on this question, are we going to drill and build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have a federal administration that makes it harder to develop our resources resources, makes it harder to build things, and wants to throw people in jail for not doing everything exactly as Kamala Harris says they have to do. And what that means is that you have a lot of people who would love to build homes who aren't able to build homes. I actually agree with Tim Walz. We should get out of this idea of housing as a commodity. But the thing that has most turned housing into a commodity is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do. But I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court. And he would have repealed the ACA had it not been for the courage of John McCain to save that bill. Now, fast forward, what that means to you is you lose your pre-existing conditions. If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure, because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walsh just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened, and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight, is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is...
So you think the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret?
Can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. Those companies provide paid family medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start, the family works better, we stay in their employers, we get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that. We were able to do it in Minnesota, and I'm still telling you this. We were listed as the best state. We're still in crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, do you support a national paid leave program? And if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program that spends a lot of money from the federal government. These programs only go to one kind of childcare model. Let's say you'd like your church maybe to help you out with childcare. Maybe you live in a rural area or an urban area and you'd like to get together with families in your neighborhood to provide childcare in the way that makes the most sense. You don't get access to any of these federal monies. We want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote childcare because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American workers. It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan. Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, childcare options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is because you've got way too few people providing this very essential service.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Walz, your ticket also has some child care tax credit proposals. Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay for that, they're $4,000 in the hole. That's Wharton School. That's his alma mater. And so I think the issue here is, those members of Congress, I can't believe they're not. When I go to businesses, sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with childcare and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president, Donald Trump left the White House, and now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by 2 lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it, but to deny what happened on January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election and the peaceful transfer of power. And here we are 4 years later in the same boat. I will tell you this, that when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look, I don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill someone, threatening to do something, that's not censorship. Censorship is book banning. We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement, but this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence made that decision to certify that election, That's why Mike Pence isn't on this stage. What I'm concerned about is, where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News vice presidential debate continues.
We want to be the world's greatest media company. This company represents a whole new generation. We're building alternatives, and the alternatives are working. Americans have enormous economic might. They just don't have any alternatives, and we're going to give them to them. It's going to change everything. You can buy my new razor instead. They'll like what we make more. They'll trust what we make more. We'll hit the target every single time. Let's make a movie. We are just getting started. We decided to spend $100 million making kids content. We're going to knock it out of the park, and no one else is going to do it.
November 5th. The night America's fate is decided. As the final votes are counted and a nation waits for the outcome, join us to break down the live election results as only Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Andrew Klavan, and Jeremy Boring can. Daily Wire Election Night 2024. Get real-time results and exclusive insights from the most trusted names in conservative media. This is more than an election. It's history in the making. Join the Daily Wire as each vote is counted, each state called, and each race decided. Daily Wire Election Night 2024. Ever wished you could clear out a whole theater just for you and your friends?
I think it's a beautiful idea.
You think it's a beautiful idea?
I do.
Well, now's your chance to do the work. It's the Am I Racist Theater Takeover Sweepstakes.
So what is the work? Because I want to do
the work.
That. I want to do it too, but I don't know what is the work.
One lucky winner will claim an entire theater for a private screening of Am I Racist with 50 of their closest friends.
Why are we talking about statistics? This is not a matter of statistics.
We'll provide the snacks and drinks. You just bring your crew and get ready for a hilarious night out. Plus, you'll roll up to your screening in style on a brand new Razor scooter, just like Matt Walsh rides in the hit comedy. To enter, follow Daily Wire on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or X. Then tag 3 friends you'd invite on the sweepstakes post.
Is there a black person around here?
I got black friends. I love them too.
I'm wondering, where do I go from here as an individual?
Go to AmIRacist.com to get the details.
Since I joined forces with the Daily Wire Plus, we've built a comprehensive collection of premium content. Get the entire collection of Mastering Life, Strengthen Your Relationship, with my series Marriage. In the series on masculinity, discover your purpose. In Vision and Destiny, develop a vision for your own life. You need to do that. My new series Negotiation offers practical steps to help you close the deal where both sides walk away with a win. We're also offering a 3-part series on success, how to strengthen your family and to strengthen your relationships and to aim up. People are struggling with depression and anxiety. We walk through all of that. How do you cope with it? What's the best pathway forward? In addition, we've explored biblical writings and their cultural influence. Our new 10-part series on the Gospels delineates the accounts of the New Testament writings. And finally, join me on a journey through time, Foundations of the West. The work I'm doing with the Daily Wire brings the spirit of adventure forward. Join us on Daily Wire Plus today.
Oh, hey, I'm Jeremy Boring, CEO of Daily Wire and founder of Jeremy's Razors. Woke razor companies love to take your money while trampling on your values. Me? I just love your money.
Cut! What is this?
We're filming the commercial for the brand new second-generation Jeremy's Razor.
Yeah, I get it. We moved our manufacturing out of China. Plus, with the new Sprint 3 and Precision 5 blades, you can shave like a man, not a manifesto. But who's he?
Customers want diversity. Customers want inclusion. Customers want Black Jeremy.
That's why there's no white people in commercials anymore? Unbelievable. Stop giving your money to me.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. It is now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please.
I'm confronting the coach, Melissa.
Well, folks, that ends the vice presidential debate. So here is the immediate takeaway. J.D. Vance delivers one of the great debate performances that we've seen in modern history. Truly a stellar performance from J.D. Vance. And for all the people who believe that he was weird on the left, there was nothing weird about J.D. Vance's performance tonight. He looked not only cool and collected, he looked kind and empathetic. He delivered what I thought was a truly articulate defense of Donald Trump's policy positions. I may not agree with all those policy positions, but he delivered a very articulate defense of them. He presented an incredibly non-threatening face to the sort of Trump-Vance ticket. The goal for Tim Walz tonight was to make J.D. Vance look weird, was to make the Trump-Vance ticket look dangerous and scary. That's what they were intending to do. And J.D. Vance thwarted that by doing precisely the opposite. He played it cool. He played it low-key. He was very friendly to Tim Walz. At some points, I thought to myself, man, I wish he weren't quite so friendly to Tim Walz. I wish at some points he would jab Tim Walz a little bit harder. In fact, there were many times when the two of them would talk about how they were sort of agreeing with one another. But it was a very, very friendly debate from that perspective. That's very good for J.D. Vance, who, again, is trying to demonstrate to the American people that the Trump-Vance ticket is not chaotic, it is not volatile, it is not scary. It's some people that you can trust. Meanwhile, Tim Walz looked really awkward out there, particularly at the beginning of the debate. I think he picked up some steam later on in the debate when they got to domestic policy issues, on which there seemed to be both sides contending as to who could spend more. But at the very beginning, Tim Walz was stumbling and bumbling all over himself. He got a few cutaways that were pretty glorious of J.D. Vance giving the Jim Halpert from The Office to the camera. And like, is this guy really saying what he seems to be saying? Tim Walz made a couple of gaffes that were particularly egregious. The one that is going to become the viral clip of the night is the one where he was asked about the fact that, like everything else in his record, he has fibbed about when he went to Tiananmen Square and where he was during Tiananmen Square. He had said that he was in Hong Kong. That isn't true. He's fibbed about nearly everything. J.D. Vance really didn't call him on a lot of that stuff. He's pretty kind in how he did call him on it. But Walz looked absolutely like a deer in the headlights to be even asked the question. He started rambling about how he had grown up in a poorer community. And then finally, he sort of stopped and said that he was a knucklehead. And then he stopped again and then suggested that he misspeaks frequently. It was a really bad look for him. And there was a lot of that tonight. He had these sort of awkward cadences, strange pauses. He looked bewildered. A lot of the time, he's kind of writing a lot of notes. He must have written a book tonight on that podium. He also looked extremely sort of bewildered as to why he was up there. Like big eyes, a lot of split screens that didn't look very good for Tim Walz. At this point, Kamala Harris has to be thinking, why didn't she pick Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania? We all know he was a Jew. She didn't pick Josh Shapiro for that reason. Shapiro certainly would have outperformed Tim Walz, who delivered what I thought was, at best, a mediocre performance. Probably the only good aspect of the night for Tim Walz came in that last sort of section where they were talking about January 6th, and Walz was trying to call J.D. Vance on January 6th. I don't think that means a lot to people. It was also at the very end of the debate. I don't think it scores a lot of points. For J.D. Vance, then, 10 out of 10 debate. For Tim Walz, like a 3 out of 10 debate. For the moderators, 0 out of 10. Again, terrible moderation. These moderators said going in, they were not going to do some sort of big fact-checking routine. There was a point during this debate where J.D. Vance suggested correctly that many of the people who are in Springfield, Ohio, are not legal immigrants. And he was talking about how they've been giving temporary protective status, which means that they didn't go through a green card process. And the fact-checkers tried to fact-check him and suggested these were all legal immigrants to the United States who were on the way to a green card. And he started correcting them. He said, no, that's not what, and they cut off the mics. So they'd said, we're not going to fact check you. We're going to let you fact check each other. Then they jumped into fact check. Every question was to Tim Walz, some sort of question about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and Donald Trump. And then they would go to J.D. Vance. And instead of asking him to respond to what Tim Walz had said, they would then ask him the single most inappropriate form of the question in an attempt to sort of cudgel him into a corner. So the moderators did quite a terrible job tonight. But J.D. Vance is a pro. He handled it extremely, extremely well. This does a few things for Donald Trump. The thing that it does, number one, for Donald Trump is, again, it quiets fears that this is a very volatile ticket. Number two, for J.D. Vance, it does a lot. J.D. is obviously looking beyond just 2024. He's super young. He's my age. J.D. is 40 years old, which means he's going to be at the center of American politics for years to come. This debate really enshrined that. The one thing that Vance didn't really do tonight, and I was hoping for him to do, was to really cast Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as radical. I don't think there was enough of that. I do think that Kamala Harris, he banged on her about not getting things done, which again is a great approach. It's something that I've been recommending for a really long time. She is the current vice president of the United States. She is the person responsible for everything that is happening right now. And he really focused in on that. But I don't think that he really drew enough contrast as to just how radical Tim Walz is. I was sort of surprised that J.D. didn't bring up the fact that Tim Walz had said that socialism is just another name for friendliness. I'm sort of surprised they didn't bring up in more robust fashion Tim Walz's record on abortion. When he did bring it up, he brought it up almost half apologetically. And that brings me to sort of the final point that I have here, which is that when you listen to J.D. Vance's policies and where the Republican Party now is under Donald Trump, there have been some pretty significant shifts. I mean, J.D. Vance is a pro-life guy. His answers on abortion, however, were obvious dodges. I mean, he was obviously attempting not to answer his own positions with regard to abortion. I get that. I get it. He's running for the vice presidency. He has no intention, and Donald Trump has already said he has no intention of signing into law any sort of federal law with regard to abortion. But J.D. could have been much more aggressive in pushing back against Tim Walz with regard to abortion up until point of birth. He tried to do it, and then he sort of backed off a little bit. His answer was about how much sympathy and empathy he had for people who had abortions, which is fine if you then go to the next step and you say, but that still does not justify the end of a baby's life in the womb. Right? Like that is something that I think is sort of non-negotiable for a lot of Republicans and pro-life people, even if they plan on voting as I do for Trump and Vance. I also think that there's a lot of talk about federal spending. JD obviously is a much bigger government guy. I think it is fair to say after that particular debate that the era of semi-small government may be over. It's been over for quite a while. I didn't hear a lot of talk about cutting the size and scope of government in that debate. But again, that is really not on JD. That's really on Donald Trump and the platform that he's proposing. So, all in all, a very good night for JD Vance. Does it shift the nature of the race in any serious way? I don't think so. I think most people's opinions are set. But it does shift a lot of opinions about JD Vance going forward. Great night for JD Vance. Good night for the Trump-Vance ticket. Justifies Trump's pick of JD Vance in this race and really makes Kamala Harris look like a dunderhead for having picked Tim Walz.
I thought there was one big revelation from the debate. Tim Walz is friends with school shooters. I thought that was interesting. Maybe he made friends with them while he was handing out tampons in the boys' bathroom. I don't know. I did want to steal 1 point from Michael Knowles before he has a chance to reiterate it.
Right.
You're welcome. Just like I stole your idea for a board game, by the way. Am I racist?
Look,
available?
You're going to do a blank book next. This is outrageous. You can come out with cigarettes.
I do think that all of the Americans who are not super clued into politics that have been hearing for weeks now that J.D. Vance is this weird guy, were probably mystified watching that and seeing this really cool, calm, collected, eloquent dude, totally unrattled up there. The last word you'd use to describe him is weird.
Yep.
So now I, in fact, am pointing out.
You said it very well, what I said.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and it was because I also thought it, but then you said it, so it's both of our points. So in a way, the media set J.D. Vance up for a victory here.
And what they did too, the moderators were so bad.
So bad.
And what J.D. Vance did so skillfully was, one, he treated them like the Haitians treated those cats and dogs. I mean, he absolutely devoured them for dinner. But then, importantly, he recovered. So instead of allowing them to rattle him, he remained cool, calm, and collected. I totally agree with your point, Ben. There were moments where I, as a rock-ribbed Republican and conservative, wished that he had punched a little harder, thrown a little red meat. But J.D. Vance knew the occasion. He knew that this debate was not a didactic exercise. He was not there to instruct people on the bioethics of abortion or fertility treatments. He was there to win 5 to 7% of voters in crucial states. He knew where his weak points are. He knew where his strong points are. I thought he did masterfully in handling those questions in a way that didn't compromise his principles, but was reaching out. I mean, everything down to wearing a soft-colored tie. It was about appealing to voters, countering the media narrative. I think he succeeded 100%.
I think it's interesting to point out the way the moderators were bad, because they didn't do to Vance what they did to Trump, which was cut him off and say things that weren't true, basically. What they did was they directed every question to an issue that was of interest to them when that wasn't necessarily the issue, which is, to my point, journalists should be completely removed from the debate process. So, for instance, when they asked about the storm, they brought it around to climate change.
Right.
But in fact, those storms have gone down since around 1900. They've dropped. The number of people who've died in climate-related incidents has plummeted. So there's no reason to talk about climate change. And I think that I would like to see Republicans stand up a little bit more to what is being used as yet another reason to grow the government. I mean, if we don't start to say these things aren't true, I don't know why people surrender to these lies. They do it because of the press. There was a lot of stuff. Every time Walsh opens his mouth, he lies. I don't think that guy can actually blink without lying. When he talked about Amber Thurman dying because of Roe v. Wade was repealed, she died because she took the abortion pill, and then the case was mishandled by the doctors, but not because of the passenger for.
So she also didn't go to the hospital when she was supposed to.
She didn't go to the hospital when she was supposed to. And they didn't do a DNC and all this. But I mean, still, that's a major, major lie. When he said that the number of border crossings have dropped, that's a major, major lie. They've doubled almost, I think. And I think that kind of thing. That the fact that Tim Walz gets away with it will be interesting to see over the days ahead whether that continues to stick. I agree with you guys about J.D. Vance handling himself beautifully. I expected it from him. He's just an articulate, educated guy. I wish I could put sometimes his soul into Donald Trump's body so that Donald Trump had that personality and the charisma, but could bring out those kinds of specifics and the calm, cool, collected attacks. I think that you're right that his point was to win over women and to win over people who might think he was a little bit weird. I don't think this is going to make any change whatsoever. I just don't think there was enough in it. I was bored stiff after about 30 minutes.
Well, that's actually what's interesting to me about the debate, and I'll say something nice about Tim Walz, too, even though I know it's unpopular to do so. This was a professional debate from competent candidates. Yep. Do I think that Tim Walz did as good a job as J.D. Vance? No. Do I think J.D. Vance was a 10 out of 10? No. I think it was a 9 out of 10, though. I think that he handled himself incredibly well. But this entire debate took me back to a different time in American politics. It took me back to 2012 when Barack Obama and Mitt Romney had their debates, and they were incredibly competent, thoughtful, articulate debates. Now, you had problems with the moderators, and very famously, Candy Crowley may have cost Mitt Romney the election in one of the debates. But since the 2012 election, we've not seen a debate in this country where you actually heard substantive policy positions being put forth by the candidates who, broadly speaking, had command of the issues, who knew exactly what they were trying to accomplish and accomplished it. I mean, one couldn't help but wish that these two guys were running for president.
Well, and to your point, Jeremy, I mean, this is actually gets to your point, Ben, about J.D. J.D. is looking forward. He has to be because President Trump can only get one term.
Right.
He's not the only one looking forward, though. Kamala Harris is a weak candidate. She's never won a single vote in a primary while running for president. And Tim Walz, by current standards, is a young man, too, and he's probably looking ahead as well.
By the way, Kamala Harris, can you imagine her in a debate with J.D. Vance? Oh, my God. He would just wipe the floor with her.
If Donald Trump hadn't so trounced Joe Biden that Joe Biden literally had to remove himself from the election, we would have gotten J.D. Vance versus Kamala.
God, and it just would have been carnage.
Bloodbath.
Just absolute carnage. Now, I will say, for Walz, I do think that the question is what each side was trying to accomplish tonight. So I think one of the things that Vance was trying to accomplish is what you guys are talking about, and what I talked about also, because of course I'm right, and that is he was trying to look softer to a broader audience. He was trying to soften that image from the sort of hard-charging guy who's on stage with people who are sometimes considered fringy, to move offline and into sort of the touch grass world. And I think that he succeeded admirably in that. But there was another thing on the table that he really needed to do that I don't think actually got done, and that was create a real perception that the Harris-Walz campaign is deeply radical. I don't think you came away from that debate thinking the Harris-Walz campaign is deeply radical. I think you came away from that debate thinking that there was a shocking amount of agreement on a stage for between Vance and Walz. They kept saying to each other, I agree with you, I would agree with that, except for, and so that was left on the table. In that sense, I think that Walz actually got away with one, meaning that I think that Walz had a dual purpose. His dual purpose was to cast J.D. and Trump as totally out of bounds. You could never vote for them. They're so crazy. And he failed in that. But I think that he did succeed in making himself and Kamala Harris appear to be viable, somewhat center-left candidates as opposed to the radical communist that he probably is. I mean, again, he is a person who literally said just weeks ago that socialism is another form of neighborliness. That's crazy. Like, how does that not come up on the debate stage? And so in that sense, I think that, would that have radically changed the race? Probably not. And so I think that the first rule of a VP debate probably is do no harm. So you can understand why JD didn't get too aggressive, because he's figuring, okay, if I go overboard, if I punch too hard, there's going to be some backlash. I understand the strategy. However, it depends on how you think the race is going. If you think that Donald Trump is currently winning the race, perfect debate for JD. All you do is don't make waves, perform really, really well, be really articulate. If you think that Donald Trump is actually down in the polls right now, you got to take a swing because Trump doesn't have another debate coming.
I so rarely disagree with you, but I'm going to offer up an alternative viewpoint. And that is this, that I have friends in Hollywood who are to the left of us on every single issue, who voted for Hillary Clinton, who voted for Joe Biden, who are strongly considering voting for Donald Trump in this election. Why? Well, because reality on the ground has asserted itself, because the country is markedly worse than it was in 2019, and because they see in Kamala Harris a sort of vapid, disingenuous character who they are afraid will actually be in practice what she appears to be. And because is that group of people, because of RFK Jr. giving independents an excuse now, or a permission, it's a better word, not an excuse, permission to say that they're pro-Trump. Because Mark Zuckerberg has given people permission to say that Trump was badass when he stood up and said, fight, fight, fight in Butler, Pennsylvania after he took a bullet through the ear. You're seeing this shift where people feel empowered to consider Trump in a way that even in 2016 they didn't, even in 2020 they didn't. But there is one group of people that Donald Trump still has a major problem with, and that is suburban women. He does horribly with them. They see him rightly as being very boorish. They see him rightly as being very crude. I'm not convinced that this, like every other VP debate that we've witnessed in our lifetimes, will mean nothing. I think that it very well could mean something. What it could mean is that J.D. Vance just gave that last holdout group of people permission to vote for Donald Trump. And you don't have to move them 7 points. You don't have to move them 20 points. There's a very narrow race. Yeah. If you make a 1-2% change in that last holdout group of people who are so fundamentally, not fundamentally, but sort of constitutionally opposed to Donald Trump, if you tell them, no, we're reasonable, we're sensible, you can vote for us, you could have an enormous impact in the election. I think that's what J.D. Vance was trying to do. And I think that he probably rightly has concluded people already know they're radical and are already very worried about ascending them, which is why even people in Hollywood are saying out loud that they might vote for Donald Trump.
You may be right.
But there's one work that needs to be done. Maybe he did it.
To your point, Jeremy, with Trump, the man is a wrecking ball. And it is probably one of the greatest things about the guy. He's got other great features too, but he's just this wrecking ball that comes in. And J.D. Vance is not a wrecking ball. That's part of why he balances out the ticket. He is a scalpel. And he was surgically trying to carve out that little group that you're talking about. And I think he did it, in as much as it has any effect at all in the race. I think he's
to be seen.
I would have I agree with all that, and that's obviously why on the abortion answer it was killing me that he was taking such an apologetic, like an incessantly apologetic tone almost with that. I understand strategically why he did it, and I understand why he wasn't being aggressive. I think that was actually smart.
The man was literally wearing pink.
Right, yeah, and he did a couple of times. He even absolved Tim Walz of I think on immigration. He said, "Well, I know that you agree, but I don't think Kamala Harris." He doesn't agree on immigration. But what I would have liked to see maybe J.D. Vance do a little bit more is just challenge the premise on some of these questions, which doesn't have to be an aggressive thing. But whether it's climate change, he didn't challenge the premise of like, why are we talking about climate change on this hurricane? It's got nothing to do with it. Abortion didn't challenge the premise. Even the gun violence epidemic didn't challenge the premise. Child care, we're talking about the child care crisis. Well, the child care crisis is a crisis mostly because we have a bunch of people that are having kids and aren't married. And so get married and then have kids and stay married, and the child care crisis mostly goes away. Maybe on that last one, I understand why you didn't want to make that point in this environment. But on a couple of the other ones, I think, and he's obviously a really smart guy. It's like a strategic choice he made to not challenge the premise on some of these things. And I'm not sure if it pays off or not.
Well, you know what I really care about? I really care about my internet privacy. It's not because I don't want the world to know all my terrible, twisted secrets. I don't care. There's a far more important reason. Some of you may not know this, but I happen to be an elite gamer. Basically, every second I'm not on camera, I'm hitting clips and wrecking noobs online. Can you imagine the physical and virtual danger I would be in if all of my online adversaries knew my true identity? Well, that's where ExpressVPN comes in. When I use ExpressVPN, these tech companies can't see my IP address at all, so my identity is anonymous. It's not only the very best for online privacy, gaming online with a VPN can minimize lag and enhance your connectivity when you're pwning the noobs. Whether you play on PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, Switch, PC, or phone, ExpressVPN has you covered. But I want you to know, ExpressVPN is not just for the geeks and nerds. If you're not protected, big tech companies can track what you're searching for, the videos you watch, and everything you click. Ben, you don't play games. What do you think of ExpressVPN?
What do I think? It's incredible. ExpressVPN is great. ExpressVPN, first of all, really easy to use. I mean, one button, you click it, you download it, you click it again, it's now on, you don't have to worry about it ever again, and it doesn't slow up your connection, which is the thing that I care about because I'm also anonymously online destroying Drew while I play games or something.
I knew it. It's time to take action and defend your rights. Take back your privacy at expressvpn.com/backstage. Visit the link to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN service for free. Again, that's expressvpn.com/backstage. expressvpn.com/backstage to protect your data today.
What I love the most about that ad read, I mean, other than the money that will undoubtedly come my way, is that most people watching the ad assume that you are joking about being a gamer.
I know.
And they probably even assume that you're joking about Ben not being a gamer. And if they only knew the truth.
It's all true. Yes.
You know, one of the things that I think is sort of amazing about everyone praising JD's performance, and again, I agree. I gave it a 10 out of 10, not a 9 out of 10. I think it was strategically brilliant. I think he did an amazing job with it. The agenda that he is pressing in that debate sounds, with the exception of being harsher on the border, like compassionate conservatism from 2000. It does. I mean, hate to break it to you, but every element of that agenda sounds like compassionate conservatism from 2000. What if we do more childcare? What if we restructure the healthcare environment so as to make healthcare easier and more available? What if we do peace through strength? I was informed that Reaganism was dead. I was informed that we were past the age of Ronald Reagan, and yet there I was, sitting there and listening to the exact slogan from the Gipper himself, peace through strength. Despite all of the radical changes that have supposedly broken upon the Republican scene, it turns out that except for some trade policy, perhaps, and the border, again, both of those are important things. I agree with one actually on immigration. I kind of disagree on some of the trade policy stuff. Except for that, sounds a lot like kind of the Republican agenda for my entire lifetime. And in fact, the Republican agenda that was actually largely dissociated from in 2010 with the Tea Party. Again, there's a lot of big government talk. I understand that a lot of this is being done because a lot of it's electioneering, and I understand you want to win. One of the things that Trump did, and it was a smart political move, although it broke my heart as a fiscal conservative, is when he said there would be no restructuring of the entitlements. And basically, anybody who says that, we should just know, okay, Republicans, anybody who says there's no restructuring of the entitlements is lying to you. They're all lying. It's not true. There will be restructuring of the entitlements, or we're going to go bankrupt. There will be either a massive increase in taxes, a massive increase in inflation in order to pay off our national debt that we will have to use in order to pay off the entitlements, or a massive restructuring of the entitlements. There is no choice. It's just a thing that's going to happen. With that said, they're all lying about it. But, again, we've heard so much about the Make America Great Again movement and how different it is in a wide variety of ways. But in terms of just actual on-the-ground policy, it kind of looks a lot like John McCain circa 2008.
This is a hugely important point, and you're absolutely right about it. It wasn't true necessarily when Trump started out, except for the entitlements. The entitlements was always the one that stuck in my craw because you're absolutely right. You're going to have to reform them. But it is something that is true. The great benefit of Donald Trump was he allowed people to use language again as clearly, so that we could say the things that we actually mean, that there is a problem in the black community with violence. There is a problem in the Muslim community with violence. The problem of fatherless children is enormous and has more to do with crime than anything else, certainly than racism or anything like that. And one of the things about Trump when he started out was he just said that stuff, and it was beautiful. And I think that moment has passed, and I think is part of the reason that he's now acceptable, that you can walk down the street in San Francisco with a Trump hat on and not get, clocked. And I think that this is that moment, the Trump moment has really passed. The thing about it is that in Europe, these right-wing parties, or as they call them, the far right, which just means right-wing conservative parties, they take years to build themselves back up into acceptable parties. They win a seat here, they win 10 seats here, they win 20 seats, and then suddenly you maybe get one of them who takes over. Here you don't do that. It's win or lose, and people get frightened. They get especially frightened by the press, and they start to back off. It goes back to what you were saying about challenging the premise. I think we don't do it enough. I think when we start to do it, when we get back to the Trumpian version of doing that, we will start to win in a bigger and easier way. It's going to take somebody with a little bit more finesse, I think, than Donald Trump.
But there's also an importance to being wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. In some ways, Ben, I think your point is truer even than you're willing to grant, which is that You're right. There were a lot of resonances to some of the policies of the Bush era. Now, there's some big changes. JD and Trump, for that matter, call for more foreign policy restraint, certainly than we saw during the Bush era. That was a much more Wilsonian policy.
Well, I will point out, that was not George W. Bush's campaign in 2000.
Correct.
George
He ran against nation building.
And was isolationist.
Of course. But then even you can consider George H.W. Bush, or certainly Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was called bellicose and a war hawk and a cowboy, but of course he did, in practice, have a relatively restrained foreign policy, and he spoke a lot about free trade, but he also called for tariffs when he felt it was strategically important. And even going further back than that, one thing that's going to stick in the craw of some people tonight is that J.D. Vance appeared to defend parts of Obamacare. Now, not all parts of Obamacare. He actually tried to hit Walz on the individual mandate, which was the beating heart of Obamacare. But I think he was being clever about this. He was trying to be subtle about it. But it tells you something about politics and conservatism, which is that when people get political wins, they really are wins, and you can't go back in time. The Tea Party ran on fiscal conservatism. We didn't get any of it. It just didn't work. Republicans have been running on fiscal conservatism at least since Ronald Reagan, and it's never worked. We keep getting deficits. We keep getting big spending. Reagan got screwed over by Tip O'Neill, sure, and the Tea Party was traded out by the leadership. And, you can make 1,000 excuses, but it's just that's how the political system works. So when Reagan ran as a Republican, he said, look, I'm an old New Deal Democrat. I didn't leave my party left me. Now, that was a way of spinning his evolution, but he didn't really challenge the New Deal. That was over. The old right used to challenge the New Deal. The new right didn't. We don't really challenge Medicare. We don't really challenge Social Security. And now, as Obamacare has become the system, we can't challenge it in as aggressive a way as we previously did. And so, it's a sad fact of politics.
This is what's going to be interesting, okay? Because when MAGA came along, one of the things that was shouted from the rooftops was, what has conservatism ever conserved, right? What did the movement ever win? You won elections, but then you didn't do anything with that. Now, listen, I'm a big fan of what Donald Trump did in his first term. I think that his foreign policy was excellent. I'm a big fan of his judicial picks. I'm a big fan of his tax cuts. I'm a big fan of his deregulatory policy. But if you're going to make the point that you're making, I think that does require a more mature view of politics than what is currently spouted and has been spouted for many years in the commentariat, which is the idea that 100% of the loaf is always on the table.
Right.
And I think that creates a perverse incentive structure, even when it comes to many of the candidates who run for higher office. One of the things that we saw from J.D. Vance is that is a person on the stage who's willing to take 80% of the loaf, or 70, or maybe 60% of the loaf, in some cases 50% of the loaf, because what he sounded like was a moderate. Okay, what he sounded like tonight was somebody who on policy and in persona was quite moderate. In fact, if you compared his performance tonight in the VP debate, which again I think was extremely articulate, to Mike Pence's VP debate performance in 2020, I'll venture to say that Mike Pence was more conservative on the stage than J.D. Vance was tonight on issues like abortion, on issues like spending, on issues like Obamacare. Okay, so what that means is that when we make arguments about the art of the possible and politics being the art of the possible, I think that everyone in our business should stop being a little disingenuous about this idea that the people you like are 100% gung-ho going to fix everything tomorrow. But that's just the way that it works. I think there's too many people in our industry who lie about this, and then they suggest that when Republicans somehow fail to meet that standard, it's because they're sellouts and they're cucks and all the rest of it. Because by that standard, there are a lot of sellouts and cucks among the people we love.
But there's a really important lesson here from this that you're making, which is Donald Trump spoke in a more moderate way than Mike Pence, than most Republicans in my lifetime. J.D. Vance tonight spoke in a more moderate way. And yet think about the effect of Donald Trump's presidency. While he downplayed abortion in the 2016 campaign, he downplayed marriage and all the rest of it, Trump is the guy that got the originalists on the court that overruled Roe v. Wade, a half-century victory. So there is some wisdom, and the Democrats are really good at this. The Democrats are really good at talking like moderates, moderation's a virtue, but then advancing their agenda. And in crucial ways, Trump did that. I trust that J.D. Vance would do that if he found himself in the Oval Office. If he talks a way that is not immoral and not dishonest, but is strategic and tactical and gets you over the finish line and allows a conservative agenda to flourish, I'm all for that.
I think this is true. I do think that it's a game of checkers. The times when you get a triple jump are going to be very rare. You're usually moving one space at a time, and that's always true. And you're absolutely right that it's bad to have a media that is constantly encouraging people to sound extreme. You have to say
if only they use their Nietzschean willpower, then we get everything.
Exactly. However, there are big victories, and it would be nice if we would think to conserve them. For instance, the Krauthammer rule that a truly successful president is when the guy after him, even if he's from another party, has to continue his policies. So Reagan was a truly successful president because Clinton basically had to continue his policies. The era of big government is over. And one of the ways he did that was reforming welfare. And when they reformed welfare, we heard this was going to be a disaster. It was one of the most successful policies that came out of the Clinton administration. And Obama just gutted it. We just let him gut it. Nobody celebrated it. Nobody said this is a great thing. He gutted welfare reform. We were right back where we started. I think the thing is, I really do believe that the Great Society has to be destroyed. And I think you have to do that step by step because so many people are eating off it, mostly in the government. Because mostly it's not doing anything for the people, but it's doing a lot for the government. But you have to start to take that thing apart.
Another big victory was the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
And that's why again, I understand all the strategic stuff, but I think there's a strategic mistake being made on the abortion issue.
I agree.
By Republicans.
Totally agree with this.
I understand that there are elements of our position as pro-lifers that are unpopular. I get all that. We want to win the women over, suburban women. I understand all that. But the leftist position on abortion is in fact barbaric. It is in fact deranged. It's actually indefensible intellectually.
Yep.
There are so many landmines for the left on this issue that they're able to just like jump over because we don't guide them into it. So, and I've been waiting for someone to do this, and I guess it's not going to happen this cycle, but in one of these debates, sometime I would love for a Republican to just turn to the Democrat and say, okay, what we're really talking about here, this is the fundamental issue here is what is a person? When is a person
That's
a
your next
person?
movie.
Right. Well, maybe it will be. When is a person a person? So you turn to the Democrat and say, this is what we're talking about. So at what point is the baby in the womb a person? Can you answer that? And they won't be able to answer it. They're going to say, Obama famously said, above my pay grade. Okay, so you can't answer. You don't know when the baby's a person. And yet you're just saying, well, we don't know, but let's make abortion legal through all stages of pregnancy anyway, which is, so even from your own position, by your own premise, that's analogous to like throwing a hand grenade into a dark room, not knowing if there's a person in there or not.
Right.
Well, guess what? If you kill a person in there, you're morally responsible for that because even according to you, there might have been. So I understand the difficulties of maybe articulating some of this in this kind of environment, but we just let them off the hook completely on
totally
this stuff,
agree with
and it
this.
drives me nuts.
And we let them do this thing with the hard cases that make bad law.
Yes.
You know, my 10-year-old was raped by her uncle and all this stuff. You know, the answer to that is okay, fine. But is it okay to abort a child because you want a Capricorn instead of a Scorpio? Is it okay because you want a girl instead of a boy? Is it okay because you did a genetic test and now they can prove that someone's gay? Is it okay to abort them? I want to know the answers to those questions. Those questions are never brought up on a debate stage. I agree with you. I don't think we can win the votes that we need. But that doesn't mean we can't win the argument.
And J.D. Vance did it he talked about part of the partial birth abortion ban.
Right.
And again, he kind of, and I
that
thought
was totally off the hook.
Right, yeah. I mean, I'm saying all this. J.D. Vance did a brilliant job. I think it's one of the most impressive debate performances I've ever seen. So I don't mean to nitpick, but at the same time, he let Walz off the hook, and he said, well, I know we all agree that partial birth abortion is wrong. We don't all agree. Every mainstream Democrat, in fact, believes in partial birth abortion, which means, just so everyone knows, that you're killing the baby as it is emerging from the birth canal.
I agree. Look, as a pro-lifer, I think JD is ardently pro-life, but we're all watching that and we're thinking, if this were a pro-life speech, I'd be, coming out of my skin. I do think JD's view and the Republican view, and I think it's a correct view, is that this issue in October and November is not going to win any of those votes we have to win. And it's to my mind, as important an issue as any there is. But anytime abortion is being talked about, we're losing votes. If you're explaining, you're losing. It's a hard issue. It eludes people who don't have a serious bioethical framework. And so just like the Israel issue is tough for the Dems, for instance, this one is tough for us right now.
But we don't have to explain. We can ask. I mean, I love what you just said, Matt, that it isn't... It isn't that we have... Man, I lost what you said. I liked it.
I'm sure it was...
Whatever it was right.
One thing we can all agree on, I would say. Look, we're disagreeing on... But one thing we can all agree on, it's the most annoying part of election season. And I'm not talking about the incessant TV ads. And I'm not talking about the obnoxious political rants on social media. No. I'm talking about the leaves in your gutters. Because it's autumn. Owning a house is great and all, but one thing I don't enjoy about home ownership is the endless barrage of decay that accompanies all temporal things in this fallen world. And nowhere is that truer than in my gutters. When my gutters can't divert water properly, they send water down my walls and create fissures in my foundation, which could crack and collapse and leave me homeless, if I'm lucky, if I survive, without anywhere to lay my sweet head. That's why I'm so happy to have Leaf Filter. Leaf Filter uses award-winning patented technology to keep everything out of your gutters except rainfall. You know, I'm something of a cheapskate, not telling tales out of school here, but there is no sense in being penny wise and pound foolish. Being a homeowner is all about the long run. And in the long run, this is going to save you so much money, so much hassle, so much heartache. Trust me. You want to take care of this right now. Don't let your home fall apart. Don't get up on a ladder every week, scraping out that leafy muck. Could you imagine these delicate hands? Instead, spend more time doing things you love, like watching the Michael Knowles show or smoking a Mayflower cigar. Trust America's #1 gutter protection system. That, of course, is Leaf Filter. Schedule your free inspection and get up to 30% off your entire purchase at leaffilter.com/backstage. You get a free inspection up to 30% off. LEAF filter.com/backstage. See representative for warranty details. Promotion is 20% off, plus a 10% senior or military discount. Only one discount per household.
What you said that I loved was we may not be able to win the votes, but we can win the argument. And in the end, the votes are going to follow the argument. We have to fight. As I've said about abortion since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we had no plan. The right had no plan because it assumed that it was never going to win on overturning Roe v. Wade. It's going to take a generational effort of winning the argument before those votes finally do change. Yep. And what I object to is giving up the argument. I don't think that it is necessarily the case that in order to win in November, we have to just pretend that we're not a pro-life party.
But I don't think that's what JD did. I agree with your point. But JD Vance said, look, I'm pro-life. You know, we've got to do a better job at communicating. It's basically what he said.
Right, but here's my problem with that. And again, I think we all agree JD did a great job. And we keep using that, kind of disclaimer at the beginning because he did a really good job. And so, but there are some deeper issues that get uncovered in debates like this, and this is one of them. The thing that he did that is a problem, I think, on this particular issue. And again, I totally understand the tactic, is when he says we have to do a better job of communicating, that immediately gets you into a democratic frame in which the problem is that we need to convince individuals that they should not abort their babies. Okay, that is not the question at hand. I, of course, agree that we should convince individuals that they should not abort their babies. Why we're big backers of, for example, Preborn, big sponsor of a lot of the shows here who actually do that on like a case-by-case basis and show women ultrasounds of their babies. You should check out Preborn. They're a really great charity. But when it comes to this issue, the problem with saying that is that what you're actually doing is undercutting the very basis of overruling Roe versus Wade. The basis of overruling Roe versus Wade is that in states there should, in fact, be legislation. And that is not just a matter of convincing individuals. That is a human rights issue. And so what you could say, here would be a sample answer, would be, listen, I'm going to be the vice president of the United States. The federal government's role in abortion has been spoken on by the Supreme Court of the United States already, which is to say it's extremely limited. This is an issue that has been kicked back to the states. And because there are different state definitions, that's just the way that it is. I will argue in every case that children deserve a right to life, and people are going to disagree in various states, and that's the way that our system works. Right? That's not going to be as evocative an answer for maybe some of the women that he's attempting to appeal to. But it is going to not undercut the argument that pro-lifers are now going to have to make for a generation in the aftermath of that. And the problem with making it into a question of individual willpower is that a question of individual willpower is the Roe versus Wade framework, right? Because the argument they're making is, well, sure, I mean, you're saying individual will and we get to make our own. That's our argument, right? We should then all abortions should be legal and we should get to make the call.
It is from just a political perspective, if you want to win the election, you need some suburban women. You also need pro-lifers, and that is your base. And you need to mobilize them, and you need to make them feel like you're their champion. And that's the really difficult needle that they're trying to thread. I'm glad I don't have to thread it. I know it's very easy for me that I can just rant because I'm not running for office. But I will say that I am worried that there's a potential political problem here in that a lot of pro-lifers are really demoralized right now. And I've been to these pro-life events. I've gone to the fundraisers. We all have. And you talk to the pro-lifers, off the record, off camera, and that's what you get, that they're just feeling really demoralized. Now, everyone here has said the same message. If you're pro-life, vote for Donald Trump. Vote for him. If you don't vote for him, you're voting for Kamala Harris. She's radically pro-abortion. It would be an insane thing to not vote for Donald Trump. Go vote for him. Absolutely. It will save babies. But even so, when you have a demoralized base, that's going to hurt you politically. And so that's why we can't just completely ignore that fact. You got to give the pro-life base something to hang on to.
It is kind of a positive thing that Republican politicians aren't willing to go the Obama route of, like, I believe that marriage is between a man and a woman. Oh no, wait, I evolved. You know, they actually are having a hard time lying, and so they're coming up with all this stuff and they're bobbling the ball. But I do think that we can speak to the radicalism of the left. I think we can question them. I think we can answer the moderators with questions. We don't have to take on this, a 10-year-old rape by...
The truth is, and we all know this, America is one of the most radical countries on abortion in the world.
That's why when they said 15 weeks, like that was a shock. That's most of Europe.
That's most of Europe.
Yeah.
Far left, and in some cases, full-on socialist Europe.
Yeah.
The only countries that have our level of permissiveness around abortion are like North Korea. Right? China. It's Canada, the most radical countries in the world. Put them in a position of having to defend their radicalism, even if you can't fully defend life in the ways that we have historically done so as a party. We're going to take some questions from our Daily Wire Plus members. If you're not a member, please head over to dailywire.com right now /subscribe. We have one of the biggest discounts that we're running all year long, 47% off using promo code FIGHT, 47 for the 47th president of the United States, which is what we hope Donald Trump will soon be. Not only do you get to ask questions of us right now, if you're a subscriber, but you also get all of our amazing content. And right now, for example, you could see the documentary that started it all, What is a Woman, doing incredibly well on the platform as people are experiencing Matt for the first time with his theatrical release of Am I Racist? You've got all that kind of content, plus the daily shows available at dailywire.com, 40% off using promo code FIGHT. First question from a DW member. Why and how do you think that Trump and Harris are so close in the polls? And what does Trump need to do to change? What does Trump need to change in order to lead in them?
So can I start with like a quick comment on the polls?
Yes.
So the polls themselves, I am not sure how much I trust them, which is a weird thing for me to say. But when all the polls keep saying the same thing and they all keep saying that every single state is margin of error, I start to think that pollsters are grouping, meaning that they are just being risk averse. Yeah. When you're looking at these polls, what they're doing is they're constructing what they call likely voter screens. They're trying to figure out what the constituency of the voting population in each state is going to be. And that means they get to play with the numbers. There's something when it comes to scientific studies that are fake. It's called p-hacking. And what that means is that you're actually screwing around with the interior stats to come up with these statistically significant results so you can get it published. And when it comes to these polls, I feel like there's some p-hacking going on. Because when I see every single poll in every single swing state this tight, I start to think, I don't know, man. Is that just a bunch of pollsters who are afraid to say what they actually think is going to happen in this election? So first of all, I'd recommend that we look at registered voter polls as opposed to likely voter polls, because again, those likely voter polls, they're so weird, right? I mean, you're seeing a poll that's showing Donald Trump only losing union members by like 7 to 10 points and only losing Hispanics by 14 points. And then he's tied with Kamala Harris. You're like, what the hell? There's no way he loses Hispanics by 14 points and maybe comes close to winning union members and then loses the election in the blues. Like, what are you even talking? But that's what all the polls are saying. And so all I can say is I don't think anyone has a read on the election. Anyone. I don't think pollsters have a read. I don't think I have a read. I don't think anyone has a read. I kind of swivel from having a gut feeling that Trump is going to win when I think about what a terrible candidate she is, and when I think about the fact that I think there is a hidden male vote that looks at Tim Walz and Doug Emhoff and goes, ugh, God, no, not that, anything that. Yeah. But, and then I swivel into, well, does Donald Trump have a get out the vote campaign? Like, what does his get out the vote look like? Which to me is the single greatest factor in the election. And I have no idea. I'm hearing conflicting information on the ground from some who say, seeing a lot of Trump signs, to people who are like, yeah, I haven't seen anybody door knocking here for a year. So I got no idea.
I think that there are 3 plausible scenarios, and Trump loses 2 of them. Plausible scenario number 1, the polls are largely accurate. It's a very evenly divided country. Trump has some good pickups among Hispanics. He has some good pickups among working men, and he wins the election. Option 2, the polls are largely right. It's a very narrowly divided country. Suburban women vote in greater numbers than men. Even though Trump makes some gains, he loses the election. Right? That's kind of the 50-50 But there is kind of an outlier possibility, and it really only works in one direction. And that is with the near ubiquity now of mail-in voting, young people actually show up for the first time. Historically, young people don't vote in our national elections, and we always bemoan the fact. But it's actually quite a good thing.
Yeah.
Young people, as a general rule, should not vote in our elections. Elections are supposed to be a little bit difficult to participate in because then there's a kind of self-selection that happens. If you're the kind of young person, as I'm sure Ben Shapiro was, who the day he turned 18, he found an election somewhere to vote in. And he knew everything there was to know about all the issues that were on the ballot. And he knew everything there was to know about each candidate on the ballot. He probably even knew the judges in California.
Nobody knows the judges.
If you're that kind of young person, great, vote. You're the outlier. You're the exception to the rule. And you'll take the initiative and you'll go register and you'll stand in line at your precinct on election day and you'll go in and you'll register your vote. And that's great. I'm glad that you vote. But what I don't want is for college campuses to become part of the left's ballot harvesting operation because of now the ubiquity of mail-in voting. So it is at least possible that for the first time we will see massive, almost parity level voting among the very young college-age population, as we historically always have as in older populations, because we've completely changed what it means to vote in this country. And if that is true, Kamala Harris will win 49 or 50 states.
So I have to say that I agree with everything you just said, except for one thing. I think there's also another possibility, which is Trump will win by a substantial margin, a much greater margin than the polls show, because of the internals on the polls, which show that most people agree with him on most of the big issues, and the groups that are moving in his direction, like the unions and Hispanics, are actually substantial, and that could be a big difference. So if that is the other, to me, that's the fourth option. Yeah, I also agree with what you said, that literally at this point, no one knows.
But when you say that Trump could win by a large margin, I don't think that Trump could win in a landslide. I think the only landslide possibility is that voting has just fundamentally changed in the country.
Well, I don't know about a landslide, but I think a substantial,
You mean he could win the blue wall states and he could win all the states?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not totally...
I think the important thing here is that it is true that whichever one you pick, you've got a 50-50 chance of winning, and so you're probably
the one thing I will say is that there are polls right now that are showing that 51% of people who vote in this election are going to vote mail-in, are going to vote early. And those people are going to vote extraordinarily high levels for Democrats. So I've been around campaigning with a bunch of different Senate candidates. I was campaigning with Eric Hovde in Wisconsin the other day. I was campaigning with Sam Brown in Nevada. I'm going to go campaign with Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania and Bernie Moreno in Ohio. Every time I go out and campaign, there's one guy in the crowd who raises his hand and says, I'm afraid that if I vote by mail, then they're going to steal my ballot and dump it in the river. Like literally every single one of these campaign events, somebody will say that. What I keep saying to them is, then vote by mail and then go vote your provisional ballot, right? Because the reality is that one of the singly most damaging things that Donald Trump ever did was to himself in 2021 when he suggested that because he had not won the 2020 election, that no one should vote in the 2021 Georgia election because they were stealing the votes and throwing them in the river. Right. It turns out that he set in the minds of Republican voters this bizarre idea that if you vote by mail, there's somebody at the balloting place who's taking your vote and chucking it out. Now, whether or not that's true, and I really do not think that there's a high likelihood that that is happening on a mass scale, whether or not you think that's true, it's the dumbest thing you could possibly tell Republican voters, because then a lot of people ain't going to vote. They're going to get on election day, and they're going to have a cold, they're going to have the gout, and they're going to be like, you know what? I can't vote today, and does my vote really matter? It turns out Democrats do the only thing that matters, which is they tell everybody to vote early and vote often.
Yeah, it's really a question of whether every political rule, all the political rules have been completely thrown out. Are we living in a country now where like none of the political rules that have governed this country since its inception apply anymore? Because if any of that stuff, if anything makes sense in this country right now, then Donald Trump wins, because you've got the last president that dropped out of the race because he's senile. You put in this candidate nobody knows anything about, and she's deeply unimpressive. You have Donald Trump has been almost assassinated twice. You have multiple crises in this country and abroad. You have war overseas. You have inflation here. People are literally underwater, like their houses are underwater in multiple different ways. And so all of that should mean that Donald Trump wins. And if he doesn't, then that means we live in a country where like nothing matters.
Where they're eating dogs and cats.
Yeah.
Where they're eating dogs and cats and nothing matters. And it's just impossible to predict anything anymore. And I'm not sure.
I think that's right.
He's actually almost been assassinated 3 times.
Because of Iran, you mean?
Because of Iran.
Yeah.
Ben, I think you have something that you want to tell the people at home.
Do I? Well, I want to tell you about something we could all use some help with, aside from our early voting. And that, of course, is fitness. The reality is no matter how much you work out, and I work out like a freaking beast, you're not going to be hitting your full potential if you don't diet right. See all these snacks we have before us? Why do you think most of us, not me, but most of us are not jumping all over them in some sort of National Geographic-style feeding frenzy? Because most of us care about our diets, and because we use this, the Lumen. The Lumen is like a nutritional coach in your pocket. You breathe into it, it analyzes your metabolism, it lets you know if you're burning more fats or more carbs. You can do this in the morning, before, after your workouts, whatever works for you. Again, I exercise pretty much every day. I'm ripped beyond all reason and measure, and I like to use it after working out to see the impact of what I'm doing and how I need to eat for the rest of the day. Not only do you get that data, Lumen will make you a personalized nutrition plan for the day based on those measurements. That meal plan will not include 90% of the stuff on the table in front of me. Having information about your health available at your fingertips, it's an absolute game changer for accountability and optimizing your fitness. I love this thing. It really is great. I use it every day. It can even help improve your sleep and energy levels. So if you want to take the next step and improve your snacking and your overall health, go to lumen.me/backstage. Get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/backstage for 15% off your purchase.
Ben actually does work out every day, and you actually do play video games. And dogs and cats live together. The whole world has gone mad. Michael, how do the VP candidates' performances compare to each one's running mate?
I thought that JD gave, as we've all said, gave one of the best debate performances for either the VPs or the nominees of anyone in my lifetime. I mean, it was up there with Reagan. And even Reagan had some stumbles in his debates. So I thought he just did phenomenally. I thought Walz did better than Kamala did. I thought Kamala, she and Trump were basically a draw in the last debate. She helped herself a little bit. Trump was good. You know, Trump in the Biden debate was extraordinarily good, so that he knocked Biden out. And Biden was extraordinarily weak. So I really, not to be, I don't want to praise the guy incessantly, but I just thought, especially compared to the degraded sense of debates that we've had going back to the 2000s. I just think Vance did better than anyone, just about.
Well, what Vance did is he gave a consistently good performance.
It was reliable.
What he did not do was ever have like a standout, memorable moment.
Trump is full of the standout moments. I mean, you can go through a lot of them.
But this is actually a really good point, actually, because I do wonder what impact that has. Meaning the way that we consume, we talked about this last time with the Trump versus Harris debate, where we watched it, and I think the immediate takeaway was Trump did not perform well, and Kamala performed better than expected, because we all sort of expected the possibility she was going to completely word vomit for like the entire time. And she mostly word vomited, but she didn't kind of vomit all over herself, so it wasn't particularly visible. And meanwhile, Trump was chasing every rabbit down every rabbit hole it was possible to find in a 300-mile radius. And one of the things that I said at the time, again, being right always, is that when you look at how debates are then viewed in retrospect, what you see are the clips, right? And so a lot of the clips went viral. The biggest clip that went viral for Trump was, of course, the eating the cats and the eating the dogs. It didn't seem to have any impact on the race because everybody kind of understood what he meant, which is the way that things tend to process.
I thought it was helpful, actually.
It certainly didn't seem to hurt him too much. But when it comes to this debate, I think there's really only going to be maybe one serious standout moment. The Democrats are going to try to make the January 6th thing a standout moment for Walz. But the really only standout moment was that moment where Walz looked for a second like a deer in the headlights when he was asked about the China lie. When that happened, Walz looked as though a trapdoor had opened out from underneath him and he was Wile E. Coyote in the moment before he was about to plummet through to the alligators below. But that was kind of the only one.
I'm friends with school shooters, could go viral on TikTok.
But nothing JD said in particular was sort of like, this is the moment where JD just knocked this guy through a wall.
And that's different, too, because he's obviously misspoke.
He's not,
it's funny, but no.
Yeah.
Why do you think, these are from questions from our dailywire.com subscribers. If you're not one, you could become one with promo code FIGHT and get 47% off. Why do you think the Dems oppose labeling the cartels terrorist organizations?
Because they're the government of Mexico. It would have large implications.
They're actually not terrorist organizations. They're criminal organizations. It's different. It's a different category.
Well, I mean, they kind of are terrorist organizations. It's just the terrorism is not directed directly at the United States population. It's directed at the government of Mexico. I mean, they literally chop up police officers.
Yeah, but that's because it's a criminal state.
I agree. There's a distinction. I don't think that's a terrorist organization.
I think of terrorism as targeting civilians to achieve political ends, whereas these guys, in a way, they sort of target politicians to achieve personal ends.
For example, today, Iran launched at least 200 ballistic missiles at Israel, and that is terror bombing. And the government of Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. But the Iranian regime is not a terrorist regime because it is a regime.
Right.
Its soldiers wear uniforms and drive around in tanks, and therefore are a military. So while they can engage in terror bombing, as they attempted to do today, in other words, we're perhaps a bit loose with the term terrorist.
The cartels are not, by the technical definition, terrorist organizations. They are national security threats to us, and I believe they should be handled by our military. I don't know why we don't go in with the military and bomb them to smithereens, but we don't have to call them a terrorist organization.
No, we can bomb all kinds of organizations.
Right. I can bomb anybody.
America. Does the nice guy appearance between Vance and Walz seem to be genuine, or do you think it was a play?
Well, I think Vance probably has a slight anger problem, and I think Walz is obviously killing women and burying them.
And wearing their skin as suits. Right.
Do you think JD has a chance to be president after Trump's presidency, assuming that Trump wins?
Yes,
of course. He has a chance to be president even assuming Trump doesn't win. Yeah. I mean, he's super young. He's very good at this.
His chances are much lower if Trump doesn't win.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, listen, you're the running mate to anybody, and there's always this assumption that you are then going to be the next president. And actually, it's kind of historically rare. I mean, it's been a while since this happened.
Who has been the running mate on a failed ticket who became president?
Wow, this is a really good quiz question.
It's a really tough one.
Let's see.
Running
on a failed ticket.
And can we even remember the vice president?
Golly, I can't. I don't know that I could. I was just thinking of Nixon.
I was thinking Nixon.
But no, he failed on his own run, and then he got it the next time, or a couple times later.
Yeah,
wow.
That is an excellent question.
You think somebody would have written a book about something like this? Ben.
Oh my God.
Why do the Democrats keep saying that Donald Trump is the candidate who benefits billionaires when almost all billionaires are on Kamala Harris's side?
This would be the big question. I think the reason the Democrats keep saying that is because they keep playing this class warfare shtick. They also say that Trump's tax cuts benefited the rich more than anybody, which is a total lie. It was actually a regressive tax cut. It actually helped people in the middle class and the lower class by percentage much more than it helped people at the top of the tax spectrum. In fact, I was living in California. He got rid of the SALT deduction. My taxes went up, right? Because I was still paying that 13% state income tax in the state of California. It wasn't deductible against my federal income tax. And my taxes as a non-billionaire, but as a rich person in California, actually went up under Donald Trump's tax plan. I think this is, by the way, one of the signal failures of the elite billionaire class, truly, is that the divide between the billionaire class and the way they earn and then their values is truly shocking. Because if you look at it, there's a famous book called What's the Matter with Kansas? That was written by Thomas Frank back in the 2000s. And the sort of proposition was, why does everybody in Kansas vote red when they're all on welfare? Right? Because there's a heavy share of people who are on welfare. And the answer, of course, was values. It turns out that they went to church. It turns out that even if you're on welfare, you really didn't want to be on welfare. And it turns out people vote their values. Well, one of the things that's happened, I think a lot of the disdain that common people have for billionaires as opposed to, wanting to be them and aspire to be them, is the fact that billionaires, by and large, now imbibe from this well of terrible social policies in which they hate church and they hate religious people and they hang around at cocktail parties in Silicon Valley and they're like Sam Bankman-Fried over in the Bahamas setting up sex pods. Yeah. And you're like, well, those are weirdos. Those are really, really strange people. And so that's actually created the case for a class warfare on the right. Right, the reverse class warfare that you're now seeing on the right, the anti-billionaire sentiment you see on the right, is not because Republicans or conservatives hate wealth or wealth creation. It's because they look at the billionaires in Silicon Valley, and this is exactly, by the way, what happened to J.D. Vance. Like on a personal level, this is what happened to J.D. Vance, right? If J.D. wrote Hillbilly Elegy, it was very popular with the Silicon Valley class, so much so that he went to Peter Thiel and people in Silicon Valley and started companies with them. And then he has said this. He said, I hung out a lot with people in Silicon Valley, and I found that they actually hated my values. And it's one of the things that actually turned his politics toward this sort of more populist anti-capitalism sentiment in a lot of ways. And I don't think that's rare.
What does the Minnesota law on abortion actually say? Is Vance right? Why can't the moderator say something on that?
He repealed the requirement that doctors... Governor Tim Walz, as governor, intentionally repealed a requirement that made doctors provide medical care to babies who were born alive surviving abortion. And so there have been multiple cases. I think it was something like 8 recorded cases of babies being born alive, surviving abortion, so they're there. You know, like Governor Ralph Northam, Democrat in Virginia, saying the baby will be born and made comfortable, and then we'll have a conversation about what to do with him. That actually happened, and these babies died, and then there were no reporting requirements that Walz removed those. And so it's barbaric, and it is a defensive infanticide. It is, for all intents and purposes, Walz saying, kill babies who survive abortion. J.D. Vance was totally right.
And that's the mainstream Democrat position.
Correct.
Is to not provide aid to these babies. Because that's the position they have to take, really. Politically, they have to take that position, because if they say we're going to provide medical care and aid to the babies, then you're acknowledging, number one, the life of the baby, and number two, the violence of the abortion that the baby just survived. They can't acknowledge that. So this is the mainstream position. Infanticide is a mainstream Democrat position.
It comes down to also your description earlier of what partial birth abortion is, what late-term abortion is, that it is a delivery of the baby and then a killing of the baby during delivery. Which is why sometimes it misses and crap, the baby's here, now what do we do?
I mean, by the way, that's the question. I mean, the question that you asked is obviously the deeper question about abortion. What is a person? But the question that that's super simple, that I wish somebody would just ask somebody like Tim Walz on a stage is, would you veto a bill guaranteeing the life of a baby born alive during an abortion? Would you veto that bill? And then if he says, I would veto that bill, so why then, you did in Minnesota, right? I mean, you actually did, that's the thing you did.
Right.
Like ask him straight up the question. That's the thing I wish that Vance had done today.
Yeah.
Here we go. And according to our crack research team.
Yes, this is exactly right.
In 1920, Warren G. Harding won. FDR was the running mate of the loser, James Cox.
I was going to say that. I had it.
And then he went on to win the presidency 4 times, 400 times. How do you think the purchase of over 200 radio stations by George Soros will affect the election? And why would the FCC expedite this?
It's a question that answers itself.
Yeah.
It actually is a propaganda, instrument that they're giving him, because he's on their side. That's right. All it is. Will it affect the election? It might, but probably not. It's probably too late.
This question is for Michael. Did J.D. Vance make Catholics proud? The question is decidedly not for Matt.
Yes, forget about Matt. Forget about that other Catholic. He did. He made Catholics very proud because he did a fabulous job. And there was one moment that I thought was actually really masterful and helpful, which is there are certain issues that are extraordinarily controversial that are probably not appropriate to bring up in the weeks before a presidential election. One of those is IVF, which the Democrats have tried to make great hay over, and it's a relatively novel technology. It's one that the Catholics are opposed to IVF. The Southern Baptists have recently come out against IVF. So it's not just the Catholics, but this is a new thing. People are grappling with the meaning of bioethics, and it's an extremely emotional issue. JD tonight said we want more reproductive help and reproductive technologies and therapies. And so he spoke in such a way that conveyed the true meaning of the Trump campaign, which is we do want more reproductive help and family care and all the rest of it. But he didn't lie. He didn't contradict his beliefs and principles. He didn't scandalize people with a controversial issue. He didn't needlessly raise an extremely controversial issue. I thought it was really well stated. It's part of why I say Trump is a wrecking ball, and we love him for it. And J.D. Vance is a scalpel, and we love him for that.
By the way, I will mention that was the first mention, I think, that I've heard of a presidential candidate actually invoking Christ on a stage.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
In decades, right? Wow. He did that in the middle of the debate. And he did it casually, which I thought was actually quite nice.
That's a very good point.
Another question from a DailyWire.com subscriber. Can the Daily Wire please do something to focus on nerd culture? There are millions of young men who don't know politics and love superheroes and video games, and the fact that we aren't making it known that we care about what they care about is a crime. They'll end up falling in with leftists who do not appeal to them on these grounds.
I actually have played video games on the air. I've actually had.
Yeah, we know about nerd culture. The 70-year-old who's read every book in the Western canon.
I think I do.
And who has been playing video games since they were invented.
I do a lot to appeal to nerd culture. I feel like I will say I did once do a nerd call. I talked about video games on the show. I was defending gamers on the show, and then the gamers spent the next 3 days yelling at me on Twitter, telling me how dare I speak on this issue. I have no right to speak about it.
That did happen.
That's a thing that happened. So
I will say this: it's going around right now. I think that our friend Liz Wheeler may have started it on the right, although it's also going around on the left. This idea that it is a total stone cold no, like complete turnoff. absolute non-starter for a guy to play video games.
Women hate video games. They do.
And it is, I think that's absurd. Obviously, video games, like anything, can be abused, and people can form unhealthy relationships as they can in the entire sort of interconnected online world, and people can devote far too much of their lives to video games. But men should be allowed to have things that they like that women don't like.
But do you agree, at least with Liz's point, that video games give women the ick?
Well, unless it's like Bejeweled or something, which women play lots of video games.
Yeah.
They just play
Candy Crush.
They just Candy Crush. They just play video games that don't have, story, depth, meaning, plot.
As someone who is famously is not a video game fan, I'm sympathetic to because the argument gamers will make, especially someone like me, is, well, you say video games are for kids. You're sitting around watching football on Sunday. What's the difference? I think there is a little bit of a difference, but I'm sympathetic to the argument. I actually think that it is pretty similar. And so my take on video games is similar to football. I like watching football. Men can have an unhealthy obsession with it, where it becomes your whole personality is football.
Disappear for the season.
Right, and that's unmanly. It's ridiculous. It's unmanly. Now your whole life is a game. It's okay to sit down and watch a football game. I watch it as a family. It's a family thing. And so it's the same thing with video games. If it becomes your whole life, if it's the focal point of you and your identity, then that's a problem, because no form of entertainment or recreation should be the focal point of your existence, no matter what it is. That doesn't mean that we don't engage in that stuff.
Yeah, I have to say, your Ravens looked amazing.
35-10. They finally came on.
But they looked like super.
Oh, and the touchdowns.
Yeah, they scored them.
Joe Flacco, right? Joe Flacco's.
Well, he plays for the Colts now.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Why are Kamala and Tim bringing to attention the fact that they are gun owners? Won't that be controversial among their base? No, because
they're lying.
Well, actually, this is a fascinating thing, actually. If you want to know where the parties believe the American people are, watch where they converge.
Yeah.
Right? It really is interesting. Like, if you watch the debate tonight, again, one of the points I've been making is they kept saying they agreed with each other. So where do they agree with each other? Where do they think the American people are? So if you were to follow the arguments tonight, here's where you think they are. Hawkish on the border, hawkish on foreign policy, right? Both of them converge on them. We need steady, strong American leadership in the Middle East, and both of them are making that argument. Kamala Harris's guy falsely, right? He's lying. But on entitlements, both of them seem to be pretty pro-entitlements. On abortion, they both seem to be running away from the pro-life position, unfortunately, as we've been talking about tonight, at least publicly. And on guns, both of them are running to the guns are really kind of great. Like, we all like guns, don't we? And so apparently that's where both parties actually think the American people are. And that is kind of a fascinating case study.
Did you notice there was a really interesting, I think most people missed it, answer when they tried to pin JD on some particular shooting with a particular father's culpability over guns, where this kid got the gun. And JD's answer highlighted a subtle difference between a conservative view and a libertarian view or a liberal or leftist view, where he said, well, in that specific case, I would defer to local law enforcement. I think they probably know their community better than some one-size-fits-all policy, say machine guns for everybody or something nationwide. That was, I think, indicative of his more traditional kind of conservatism. And I also think it played.
How do you think the longshoremen strike will impact the election?
I think if they continue to soft soap the unions, it'll be really bad for the Democrats. I mean, this is going to, there'll be toilet paper shortages and food shortages and things like that. And if Biden goes around bumping into walls and saying, well, we have to have the people talking with the,
I don't know. This feels like a setup to me, honestly.
It feels like a setup?
Yeah, it feels to me like Biden and Harris have already gone to the unions, and then they've gone to the employers, and they basically are going to walk out. Look at the strike that we just averted. Look how, and we did it on behalf of our union workers, because they know that they're really trailing with unions. This whole thing smells like a setup.
If you're right, then it's because Joe Biden wants Kamala Harris to win, and I'm not at all convinced.
There's one really terrifying thing that could happen in the coming weeks and months with the longshoreman strike, which is that it will be much more difficult to get Mayflower cigars, which is why someone should probably stock up on them right now, everybody out there. If it's a setup, it would be fitting because the union boss looks like the love child of Archie Bunker and Tony Soprano, and he's, he seems to be in the tank for the Democrats, but I don't know. the head of the Teamsters comes out for Trump in this election. Maybe something really is changing.
That's kind of been on my mind, but you may be right. It's hard to know.
One thing that's on my mind, and I want to leave everyone with this thought. Elections are incredibly consequential. We talked about it tonight, the changes in both parties as a result of elections, the change in our national politics just because of the success of Obamacare. Not its success as a policy, but its success in becoming national policy. And so elections matter. This election matters. I have a lot of people that I know, like multiple people that I know, who are so afraid of Kamala Harris ascending the presidency that they've begun canning. And this is one of the things that I love about conservatives is that they think that if the end of the world comes, they can perhaps avert the worst impact of the collapse of our society by having enough peach preserves in the pantry. Right. It's charming. And it is, of course, always possible that we could lose all of this. We're not promised tomorrow. We're certainly not promised that tomorrow will be good. We're certainly not promised that our complex government structures will hold throughout society, throughout history. They change. Often it's cataclysmic. Often people suffer greatly and for long periods of time when great empires fall. All of that is on offer. We could lose the country. I don't think that it's particularly likely. I think that should Kamala Harris win, and make no mistake, Kamala Harris could be the next president of the United States. It is, you can feel in your gut that maybe Trump is going to win. You can think that maybe people aren't paying attention to the media. I've got a sneaking suspicion that people aren't going to put up with this, but they might.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris might win. It could be a worst case, like I said, young people could vote because of the ubiquity of mail-in voting. She could win 50 states. It could be a complete sea change in the country. And if that happens, well, we'll just have to wake up the next day and get back to fighting. And the fight will get harder. There will be substantial policy that comes out of a Kamala Harris ascension that will set us back. It will be terrible. There could be what even seem like worst cases. They could take the Senate, do away with the filibuster, add 2 states, try to create sort of permanent one-party rule in the country. They could censor us greatly. Truly bad things can happen. And many bad things will happen if she is elected president, but it will not be the end of history. There is every possibility that the short-term pain of a Kamala Harris ascension could lead to a kind of national restoration, not through her presidency, but because of her presidency. Her presidency could be like Jimmy Carter in the 70s that leads to Reagan in the 80s because it was so bad that it shook even all those new people who seem like they'll never change the way they vote. Should you be cavalier about that? No. When people like Dick Cheney or David French or others say that they're willing to vote for Kamala Harris because of all of the unique evils of Donald Trump and because they want to save the Republican Party, many of their criticisms of Donald Trump aren't wrong. What they're fundamentally wrong about is their assessment of the left, right? They're sort of rightly observing that things are happening on the right that they're uncomfortable with, and they're being, I think, pretty Pollyanna about, but people will suffer if Kamala, like it is a certainty that Kamala ascending will lead to suffering. There's a certainty that Kamala winning will lead to the destruction of many advantages that our values have in the culture. And so even if we think that, is it possible that Kamala winning could, in a longer view of history, redound to the good of the country? Maybe so, but that's not the...
Yeah, that's for Providence to sort out.
That's for Providence to sort out. What's before us is the election. And in the election, we have to do the things that's given to us to do. What's given to us to do is to vote for Donald Trump. Not because Donald Trump is great. I happen to not think Donald Trump is great. We have disagreement on this panel about how great he is or isn't. He is better than Kamala Harris. He is, the people he will appoint to run the federal bureaucracy are far superior to the people who she will appoint to run the federal bureaucracy. The judges that he will help move through the Senate are far, far superior to the judges that she will help move through the Senate. We've lived through 4 years of Donald Trump, and we know that despite his somewhat unique, I think he has some unique character flaws, he also has many unique advantages that we've seen redound to the benefit of the country. That's what's been put before us. So I'm not trying to say the election isn't important. I'm not saying don't vote. On the contrary, I think you have a moral obligation to vote. and I think you have a moral obligation to vote for Donald Trump. But we can't approach the election as though this is the last election of our lifetime. That kind of language is both demoralizing instead of motivating. People think it's motivating, but I think it's actually demoralizing. It keeps people from engaging in the political process, because if you think it's all over, then there's really no reason for you to go to the polls. But it's not just that it's demoralizing. It's also a kind of amelioration of your responsibilities, because if you do the thing you're supposed to do and go vote on November 5th for the Republicans, and we lose, your responsibility didn't end. You just have a responsibility the next day to fight the harder fight. And we're going to wake up and do that. I hope we wake up on November 6th. I mean, I think we're joking if we think we're going to wake up on November 6th and even know who the president is.
On December 15th, I hope we wake up.
Somewhere in mid-December, we'll have a president. And I hope that it's Donald Trump. And if it is, we're going to wake up and we're going to know that we have to hold Donald Trump accountable in some ways, and we have to support Donald Trump in some ways, and we have to continue to fight the fight.
Have to drink a lot of champagne, smoke a lot of cigars.
And if Donald Trump is not the president, fight's going to be harder. It may not be, we may not live in the world that we want to live in. We may not be faced with the kinds of challenges we had hoped to be faced with. We may be faced by even harder challenges. And if that's the place God puts us in the world, then we just wake up and we go and do that thing. You can't live your life as though you have no agency. You can't live your life as though the end of agency is, 33 days from now. That you're still fully you, and you still have responsibilities going into whatever is next. And that's really been on my mind to communicate, because I see people canning peach preserves, but it's more than that. I just see people thinking like somehow Kamala winning is the end. And it may very well be the end of some things, but it's not the end of everything.
Yep.
And it's not the end of the responsibility that God's given us. When the Bible says that God establishes government, that must mean us, because sort of uniquely in human history, it's a government of the people. We are a functioning part of the government in a democratic republic. And that means that all the reasons that God established kings and queens of old are still in play when he established this country. And many of those responsibilities now are with us, not just with the people who are in that top chair. And those responsibilities continue for as long as we're here. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Daily Wire Backstage. We'll see you, I think the next time we'll see you is election night. And so remember what I told you tonight. It's the last election of our life. Be afraid, be very afraid.
And can your peaches.
Can your peaches. We'll see you then.